What went down when you dialed numbers written on bathroom stalls? I once added someone on Snapchat who'd spray-painted their name on top of a mountain I was hiking, and they replied to my message with, "Who the frick is this?" Like I was the jerk. Never dialed one myself, but I answered a call one day from an unrecognized number. He was in a bathroom stall at Arby's that read, "For a long philosophical conversation followed closely by rough bedroom activities, and then my phone number." Now, I didn't write it, but I guess word gets around. I found a business card in a phone booth printed cryptically with, "If you don't call, you'll never know," and a phone number. Since I had time left on the phone card, I called and now I know. It was a pseudo-religious self-help cult trying to recruit people to seminars at their ranch in like New Mexico somewhere, with promises of finding a new spiritual family. No thanks. The last thing I need is more family. There was a guy in my group of friends that annoyed the crap out of me. I made a series of "free yard work by the mentally challenged" signs and hung them up in Costco bathrooms numerous times for about 5 summers in a row. He'd always complain of these stupid people calling him thinking he was a special needs person who liked to do yard work for free. I never did tell him it was me who put those signs there. I dialed a number from my college bathroom stalls that said, "Free down under kiss." I thought it was going to be the police department or something asinine, but I wanted to do it anyway because you never know, and it was a number for vector marketing. Fah! I saw a number scratched on a table at a bar that said something like, "Call Mike, he's been really mean," sad face. So I sent Mike a text telling him to be nicer, and in response he sent me back several angry, "Who the hell is this?" texts over the next few days. He is really mean. Yeah, I think Mike needs a few more unsolicited messages to help fix his attitude. That's needlessly aggressive of him. Good on that person for scratching his number on the table and helping him get the treatment he needs. I was at a restaurant and they had the option to give $1 to charity and to put your name on this piece of paper that we posted on our wall. While waiting in the lobby for a friend, I saw that one had a name and a phone number with "Call me" under it. I figured, why the hell not? A girl answers and I ask if it's this person and she says yes. I explain I'm in the lobby of the restaurant and her name is on the wall with her phone number. She doesn't believe me despite my best efforts to convince her I don't know who she is. Eventually, she asks me to walk out the front door of the restaurant, to which I obliged, and she says, "Oh, holy crap." Meanwhile, I'm standing in the parking lot trying to figure out who the heck is looking at me. She asked me to take the paper down and thanked me. Apparently, one of her co-workers told her that he did it and she didn't believe him. They worked in the area and frequented the restaurant. In high school, I messaged one that was on the backseat of a bus that was going through a town that was a 30-minute drive from my town. I texted, "Who is this? Your number is on the backseat of this bus." They replied, "Greg." I told my classmate about it a week later since his name was also Greg. Sure enough, he holds out his phone with the text message from me on the screen. About 10 years ago, someone wrote, "Call this number for a good time" on the sidewalk. So I saved the number for crap talking, thinking I'd call the number and at least let them know how I got it, but I never did. Just kept the number saved as $?. Well, the other day I was on Snapchat and I saw $? pop up in the suggested friends or whatever, so I added her and she added me back. She's a babe and I have no idea what to say to her, but I want to tell her how I got the number and not seem too weird. I found a number on the bathroom stall in a bar. When you need a friend, when something great happens and you have no one to tell, when you want to vent, when you want to be spontaneous, when you need help getting home from a drunken stupor, call me. Rest in peace, Ryan. I cried and called to tell her what a great message it was, and we both cried and talked for a few hours. I know a guy that called a number written on a $5 bill. He figured she must be a quality girl because it was a 5 and not a single. She had a great voice on the phone, so they made a date. He played guitar in a popular local band, and there was a hip restaurant next to the club they were playing at, so they arranged to meet before the gig. He figured they'd have dinner, and then he'd impress the crap out of her with his playing. He was truly a fine guitarist. So he walked into the restaurant and looked for a girl in a pink dress. There was one, and she was enormous. So he slipped out before she saw him. So during the show, he sees the crowd part as the girl in the pink dress makes her way up to the front, where she glares at him during the entire set. Afterwards, she screamed at him for standing her up. He felt a little guilty but said he'd feel worse if he'd had dinner with her and then dropped her. After all of this, his warning was to not call numbers that you see on currency. Not in a bathroom stall, but someone had once written one of my male friends' numbers on a classroom bench. A girl called him, they talked and began dating. Eventually, a guy who had a crush on her beat my friend up, and that's how my friend lost his first girlfriend. When my friend and I were about 11, there was a public bathroom in the park where we had soccer practice, and outside that public bathroom was a payphone, and on that payphone was scrawled a number and above it the word S-E and you know the final letter. I don't recall ever paying for a call, so maybe it was a 1-800 number. I don't remember. It was a recording of a woman's voice. I remember only the beginning, but I can hear it crystal clear to this day. You want to have fun? Yeah? Then a bunch of feminine giggling. We'd hang up when the recording asked for a credit card number to continue the call. I think we were terrified our parents' credit cards would somehow get charged and we'd get caught. Kid logic. We're both straight females, but we still called that thing all the time. It was seriously the most risque thing I've ever done up to that point, and also probably for a long time afterwards, sadly. I was at the bus stop and I saw this text. If you're in deep crap, call this number. I called the number because I had like 30 minutes to bus. It was a small taxi company. I told him to come pick me up. He saved me like 25 minutes of waiting. The guy was cool and I even gave him a solid tip. I texted one of these numbers a picture of a cucumber because that's what the note said to do, and they sent me cabbage. I was playing Jenga at a local bar with some friends. All the blocks had people's numbers on it, so we made a rule that you had to text any number you pulled out. The first person I texted sent me a picture of a pile of coffee beans labeled, "Find the Kanye." There was a tiny Kanye face on a bean in the bottom left corner. I asked for Jenny and instead got a very irate cussing out from a woman with a southern drawl. I never called it, but I was in this English pub in Tokyo and the walls were pretty typical of an English pub. West Ham forever, Sarah is a slag, and so on. Then one said, "Is anyone interested in joining our baseball team every Sunday at 11 a.m. with his phone number?" He must have thought it was an actual message board. Bless. Kind of unrelated, but I took a picture of my Snap code, basically like a QR code for Snapchat accounts, using one of the display phones at Best Buy. I now have a random woman following me. An old-sounding woman answered when I called the number, offered the best B followed immediately by a J in town. I asked her how much. They told me $5. I asked her if it was blueberry or blackberry jam. She called me an idiot. Boysenberry jam, idiot. Those other ones are out of season. I got me a boysenberry jam from that woman, if you know what I mean. I used to call the numbers and inform the recipient of where there were not such nice things written with their name and number. They'd always ask what it said, and I'd always reply that I wasn't sure they wanted to know, but they'd insist. I'd tell them verbatim in my radio announcer voice and listen to the shock emanate from the cell phone. They'd always ask me to mark it out, but I'd tell them that I didn't have a pen or Sharpie. I found my sister's number once and couldn't stop laughing. I'm sorry, but if you call your sister and tell her that, there's no way she wouldn't think that you hadn't written it there. I think in that one specific instance, you should have gotten a Sharpie and crossed it out. Best experience. Became regular F-buddies with this guy. I'm also a guy, by the way. He was a bike enthusiast and we went biking several weekends. But my worst experience, I went to meet this other guy, after some discussions and deciding whose eggplant would go into whose cornhole, and the guy had lied about his stats. I'm talking about being a real chubber, beer belly, out to 10 months pregnancy level. Well, I'm here anyway, all revved up, secretly grit my teeth and say, let's do it. He says he wants to do it without protection. He claims to be a virgin and needs his cherry popped. Seriously, guy, your number is on the wall of a mall bathroom, and you want me to believe that you're a virgin? He got offended at my nasty insinuations, told me to go F myself, and to lose my number. I ain't gonna want to see your, and he gave me a racial slur for brown people, face ever again, and you should go back to your own country where you belong and do unspeakable things to goats. When I told him we have no goats in Toronto, the weather is much too cold for them, he got even more mad. Fun times. I dialed up a number scratched on a horse feed shed storage door out in Loudoun County, Virginia, and Robert Duvall answered. He cautioned me not to use the number again unless I could deliver him 2 to 55 pounds of horse and mule feed. I actually met my best friend in middle school ringing one of those numbers. Huh. I had the best S and F of my life as the text had advertised. The guy was homeless, though. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. It was written on a piece of paper way back around 10 years ago. It said, "Call this number if you're struggling with life." I was 13, so I called the number. We had never met, but he had a really sweet voice and we talked for about an hour. Gave me great advice about how the world can be cruel to gays like me, but that the future will get better. We never communicated after that. If I could meet that guy to thank him, even for a second, I would. Thank you, Mr. Target. That's what he wanted to be called, by the way. I saw the number read Hunger Games Hotline, so I took a picture of it in case I ever wanted to call it. A year later, I was on a school field trip coming back from DC when I tell my friend we should call this one number. He says yes, we dial it, and we hear robots doing the deed. When I was younger, someone wrote, "For a good time, call," and my number on the playground slide. People would call a couple of times a week, laugh, and then hang up. I started to get annoyed, so I went to the playground to cover it up. Someone saw me doing it and called the cops, saying I was vandalizing the playground. I had to explain to the cop that I was just removing my number so people would stop calling me. Okay, so it wasn't a bathroom stall, but a hilarious story. Back a long time ago, Paris Hilton had her T-Mobile sidekick hacked, and all of her contacts' numbers leaked online. I was contracting some 15 or 16-year-old kid to do a website for me at the time. About 4 or 5 hours before the list went public, this guy building my site hits me up on AIM. Yeah, I'm that old. And he's like, "My buddy just did some crazy hack, he got all these celebrities' numbers." "Bullcrap," I said, because at the time this was unheard of. He sends me a text file of about 150 names and numbers. The first one that stuck out to me, that I knew who they were, was Fred Durst. I rang him up, froze, and then said, "Yes, is this Mr. Durst?" "Yeah, who is this?" I truthfully explained the exact scenario, and my morbid skepticism led me to dial him up. He said something about him going to have to turn his phone off now and actually thanked me for giving him a heads up. After that, I waited a few hours and picked a number at random, someone I didn't recognize or know. Wrong idea. She picked up the phone and said my number was now logged into her phone and the FBI were on the case. Whatever. She finished by telling me that she hoped I died. At that moment, I knew the list had been public. I logged into some MIRC chats and it was story after story of interactions. I don't like his music, but Fred Durst seems like a cool cat, and I like to think I gave him a heads up before the crap hit the fan. Overall, teenagers do dumb crap. I went outside after watching a movie at the theater and someone had written their number in the snow that had collected on the back of my car. I texted it and it was just a random guy who went to my school. Never met him, but he saw the decal from my university and his buddies had dared him to leave his number there. The message said, "For the best B," again immediately followed by the letter J. The person that answered said that meant best blinging jewels. Well played, K Jewelers. One of my best friends in college. It was our freshman year and somebody had written a number in the girls' bathroom in our dorm. Half drunk, we pressured her to text the number, and to our surprise, she got a reply. It was another student. They actually ended up talking for quite some time and met like a month later. They've been dating for 5 years now. I went to a gig and everyone who frequented this venue would write on the wall while queuing. So me, being drunk already, decided I'd ring one because it said something amusing. Guy answers and I told him where I am and that I was bored, so I rang this number off the wall. We had a conversation about who he saw and who I was seeing that night, and due to me being drunk, I sang a song by the band he went to see down the phone to him. Funniest queue bonding moment so far. Me and a few friends wrote one of our friends' numbers in the Portaloo or drop toilet at Glastonbury Festival about 6 years ago. Every summer around festival season, he'll receive a few calls from people asking if the guy wanting fun stuff in the butt is still available, and if so, where does he want to meet. His girlfriend hates us almost as much as he does. When I was in 7th grade, pubescent and virginal, my sister, in the 9th grade, informed me that my name and number were written on the stall in the girls' locker room. Turns out, not only was I hot, I was good in bed, available for a good time and a wild lay. This was music to my ears and my raging hormones. I really wanted to do the deed with another human being. My friends did as well, but they were unfortunate, unrepresented suckers. I just sat back and waited for the calls to come in. I didn't stray far from the house, even though I'd trained my ear to distinguish our ringer. I could hear the phone from 3 states over. Nobody called interested in sampling my raw animal prowess. 4 years later, in the summer between 11th and 12th grade, I was at an all-night diner with some friends of mine, dining with my sister and her friends, because college chicks, am I right? One of her friends came out of the bathroom talking about some graffiti, and I remembered. I mentioned to my sister that I'd waited for the phone to ring for weeks, and it was a karate chop to my ego. She then informed me that she had changed the 3s to 8s, while laughing with her friends. At me. Hot and good in bed me. I know that your sister seems mean, but as most of those calls were either going to be pranks or people you probably shouldn't be taking a risk on in the 7th grade, I honestly think she did you a solid, and she doomed some other person to a bunch of weird calls. Mine wasn't a bathroom stall, but just a couple of weeks ago, I met a girl from writing her number in Roman numerals on a school desk, and just 2 days ago, we ended up going out together. School bathroom with a phone number in Sharpie. Written above it, it said, "Sucks eggplants for free." I started typing it in to text, but I realized it was my own phone number. High school kids are brutal. Called the number, went on a date, it was successful. Would recommend 10 out of 10. One time I found a number that said, "For an adequate time, call this number." So I called it, and it was adequate. As crazy as it sounds, I texted a number off the bathroom stall in a movie theater in Texas when I was visiting family. I made some crappy joke and then told them I got their number off a wall. Somehow it turned into a full-on conversation, and that was how I met the first love of my life. We were together for over a year, and it's just crazy to think it all transpired because I texted a number off a bathroom stall. That was about 6 years ago, and I haven't seen or talked to Kaylee in years, but it's still a pretty cool story to tell people. The number was on a bench at my local canal. Me and the wife were walking the dogs, and someone had written in very childish writing, "For a good time, text this number." So for a laugh, I did, and the resulting conversation was very strange. The person started by asking for pictures of me and asking if I wanted undressed photos of them. After politely declining, I said, "I don't think my wife would be happy with that." They said, "Don't worry, your wife can join in." Through this time, due to the writing, I presumed that the number was written by a bunch of kids because of the style. I also thought it was probably just some kids messing around with me. My wife said it's probably some local gay guy actually looking for fun. I never believed that, though. This person was very persistent and texted me at least 4 times a day for nearly a week straight, with me constantly ignoring them. Fast forward about a month, I used the local toilets near the canal. These toilets are famous for gay hookups at night as well. There's metal installed in the stalls and big blocks of woods where you'd normally find, special holes for people. Whilst taking a whiz, I see a number written on the stall. I check it against the number from the texts, and yep, my wife was right all along. On the stalls it said, "For the best gay down-under kiss you'll ever receive, text me." I texted the number while I was drunk. Usually sober, I wouldn't. The same day, a woman called the police and reported me for stalking, even though I only texted her saying hi and telling her that her number was on the bathroom wall. So, I have a question. Does the story count if the phone number was sharpied on the side of the eggplant that came through the bathroom wall? Before my senior year of high school, I was a camp counselor at a week-long camp in the Pocono area. There was a number in the craft cabin, and I texted it. The guy was confused about it for a second and then laughed when he remembered writing it. And then I accidentally mentioned that it was a girls' camp, and he hit on me and I blocked him. A friend of mine called a number carved into a beam in line for a roller coaster. He dialed it up for a good time and asked if he could have a good time. The person who wrote the number was a teenager, and the person who picked up the phone was this teen's grandmother. The look on my friend's face was priceless. My family was out hiking, and we found a number carved into the wooden guardrail. My sister called it and pretended to be a forest agent. Probably not the same name for them. She told the girl that the state was pressing charges against her for destruction of public property. The girl started crying, my sister started laughing, and hung up the phone. My cousin met her boyfriend of 3 years by calling a number on a bathroom wall. It said something like, "For a good time, call this number." She texted out of curiosity. Apparently one of his friends had put his name and number down there just to mess with him. He usually had guys sending him D-pics and stuff and was considering changing his number. They texted back and forth over 6 months until they finally met. They now live together and seem happy. If they ever end up getting married and having kids, they'll have quite a story to tell about how they met. When I was in university, I messaged a number on the wall of a bathroom stall. A guy and his friend both came and left. It was exhilarating. Got tested immediately afterwards and never did it again, but it was the hottest bedroom fun time I've ever had. What are the cons of being attractive? You don't know if someone likes you for you or just how you look. They come for the looks and stay for you, I guess. Not always. That's definitely one of the downsides of physical attractiveness. Sometimes people will think they know you, but they don't. And when they discover that you're not just who they imagined you to be, some don't even care who you really are. They just wanted that made-up version and are disappointed when that's not you. This isn't an issue I have anymore as an adult, likely because I know how to handle myself professionally. But in my teens, I had a side job as a mover, and the amount of clients who would be surprised that I was about to graduate with honors and go to prestigious university. It was likely a combination of being just a mover, but also being decently attractive and very physically fit. People project a lot of bullcrap onto you, all from their own heads. Pretty? You must be dumb. Pretty and articulate? First they're shocked, then you're a B-word who has too much self-esteem. Shy and pretty? You must be stuck up. Outgoing and pretty? Who do you think you are, you bossy B-word, clearly chasing after other women's boyfriends? Great figure? You must be a hussy. Great skin? You've probably had work done. Dress well? You waste your whole salary on clothes. Too skinny? You're mentally ill. They armchair diagnose you with anorexia. In a relationship? You're clearly a gold digger. Single? Then you're either a hussy who is playing the field, or you're a snob who thinks you're too good for anyone. You have to work overtime to appear friendly and ease everyone's insecurities. It's fricking exhausting. I wish I could upvote this a million times. I can relate so hard to all of these, and there's nobody I can talk to about any of this, because how do you get to complain about being too attractive? People doubt if you're into nerdy stuff as much as you might say. Plus, a lot of your actions just have all these preconceived notions. People think you don't have any problems or struggles. And we've touched upon the problem of the notion of the fake gamer girl, where people are apparently so convinced that people are single-faceted that they can't accept that someone might have more elements to them than their physical appearance. This comment had some interesting follow-ups. Oh, I totally agree to this. I'm a fairly attractive woman, and when I tell people I'm a software consultant in biotech, they almost negatively judge me? Or there's often the, wow, beauty and brains, huh? Comment. Like, yes, just because I'm pretty, it doesn't mean I'm stupid. What the frick? I guess it's just a mixture of one or the other and possibly some envy. You have physical looks and intellectual prowess. That can definitely make some folks seethe with inferiority. That's really their problem, though. Plus the impossible dance you must do. Smart but not intimidating. Friendly but not flirtatious. Helpful but not the office assistant. Talkative but not opinionated. And serious but not abrasive. The list goes on. I'm a woman in finance who's decently attractive, at least fit and plain enough to not be considered ugly, and it's an impossible balance to strike. People seem okay to openly suggesting that everything I have, like an education and fitness and a happy marriage, I lucked into. It feels really difficult to toe the many lines. People feel the need to compete with you, find something that makes you look bad, or show fault. One or two co-workers, same gender, jealous, competitive types, will set out to sabotage your success and your relationships with other people when you're just minding your own business and trying to do a good job. You're the immediate target for psychopath types. I think everyone gets that, not only attractive people. As someone who's been both, it's not the same. When you're attractive, lots of the time people of the same sex or gender will view you as a social and sexual threat to them, and act accordingly. These people are usually just super insecure about themselves. Somehow, being kind automatically equals being flirtatious or interested. People don't think attractive people struggle with their mental health, constantly being shamed or mocked out of jealousy, and people praying for your downfall. This. Oh my god, this. Anytime I talk to a male coworker, all the ladies will rush after and say the guy has a huge crush on me or his face lights up when you talk to him. I'm honestly just talking to people, male and female, to actually have a conversation. I'm not flirting and there's no intention on my side. I'm just conversing, people. So frustrating. Loneliness. Friends of the same gender avoid you because they're afraid their partners will want you. Opposite gender only want one thing. My best friend in high school became threatened at some point when the pretty scale tipped in my favor. It had always been in her favor. I feel gross saying this, by the way. I don't consider myself a conceited person. It didn't help that her mother even made comments, urging my friend to stop hanging out with me, not to let her boyfriends meet me. It was so dumb. Years later, I realized they were just shallow and toxic. But yeah, some women will just not like you until you reach middle age. I'm pretty okay talking to girls in general, but then there are the bombshells, 10 out of 10. And there's just something so intimidating about them, and I don't know why. I just can't make decent conversations, at least not at first. I'd imagine it happens a lot to them, and must be quite awkward and weird when you just want to have a normal conversation with people. Creeps. As a below-average looking woman, I can actually tell you that creeps creep on ugly women too. This is the unfortunate reality that is perpetuated online, mostly unknowingly. People assuming it's mainly attractive people being stalked or something. It's become a large documented thing in Me Too when people believed almost every claim since the actresses were mostly young and conventionally beautiful. But most indecent conduct isn't some creep following you or picking out attractive women. A large majority is done by someone you're close to or related to, in which case it's more about a power dynamic than conventional attractiveness. As someone who's been both young and hot and fat and frumpy, I found that the more conventionally attractive you are, the worse it is. Hot me was harassed every time I traveled home alone at night, and frumpy me enjoyed blissful invisibility. Not only the unwanted attention goes away, people are also less likely to help you or give you free stuff. There's a danger in taking on topics like this of suggesting any one group, in this case the conventionally attractive, have things better or worse than the rest. Hopefully, small conversations like the one I just quoted can highlight the unfairness that will affect people at all levels of perceived aesthetic value. The next comment summarizes one recurring theme in this thread quite succinctly. People can like you way too much or hate your guts with a burning passion really quickly based off nothing. Jogged my memory of a time when I was attending my cousin's Halloween birthday party. My cousin, drunk as a skunk as he should be, ended up smashing a bottle or glass, and I was cleaning it up. Another guy came over to give me a hand. Well, I guess his girlfriend, who I'd never met prior, too noticed and felt a way about it and targeted me the entire night. She kept taking jabs or making random comments about me. The solid proof of her raging, whatever she was on, was at the end of the night when they were leaving and she said goodbye to everyone and pointed at me and said, "But not you. Some people truly just suck." Close friends repeatedly dropping you or even straight up ghosting you when they develop unreciprocated feelings for you and it gets too painful for them. I've got serious abandonment issues. Dating can be hard because people create an image of who they want you to be. It's even harsher if you're attractive and a complete weirdo. People act like you're doing something wrong when you break their perfect image, like you're taking something away from them and ruining a good thing. I can imagine it being a con if people think attractive people are only good for their looks and nothing else. If an attractive person is very accomplished, I feel like others would say they got help from being good-looking and that they didn't work that hard. In my experience, attractiveness became a crappy and unfulfilling value. At times when my self-esteem was low, I often clung on to being attractive as if it was all I had going for me, and developed a dependency on external validation and comparing myself to others. People who are or view themselves as less attractive than you treat you like garbage purely because they don't like that you're better looking than them. This one is especially true for women. Achievements that you make or respect you gain, such as getting a prestigious project at work, being put down by coworkers to the boss wanting to sleep with you. For the longest time, I would just lay in bed after work and just wonder why certain coworkers didn't like me. I knew that my personality can't possibly be compatible with everyone, but it bothered me that people I only interacted with in pleasant, passing little conversations treated me coldly anyway. As one example, I would pick up shifts at a location where this woman always made faces and snarky comments about the lunches I brought to work. "That doesn't look good, to be honest." Or, "That smells off, are you really going to eat it?" I had no idea how to respond, and she would tend to ignore me if I talked to her anyway. It was like 10 years later when I finally realized that my small size might have had something to do with it, considering she was a large woman who constantly talked about weight. And that bothered me even more, to be honest, because I agonized for months over what was wrong with me, and it turns out it was my looks? It never occurred to me that it could be something as petty as that, but apparently it was important enough to her to make a nervous 20-year-old feel that much more uncomfortable. I'm treated like an idiot, presumed uneducated or naive, not taken seriously until I prove myself, and my absolute least favorite thing, I can't tell if I'm being pursued for my body or my character. I've also been stalked and the victim of attempted unspeakable acts, which supposedly has nothing to do with the way I look, but I've had the urge to completely change so people stop looking at me at all. People never seem to think the partners you choose look good enough, and it's exceptionally irritating that they even expect you to care. I like this point. As someone who's occasionally punched well above his weight when it comes to dating, I can say that in some cases, eventually you learn to look at the people who judge you lacking as a partner with amusement and disdain. Maybe that's just me, though. Girls saying they want to be friends, and then they get all moody when you're friendly and don't want to flirt back. Probably worse for women, but still. People manipulate and hide things from you because they either want to satisfy themselves or use you to attract and influence others. You can easily end up out of your depth and in bad relationships without the tools or power to escape. You also attract narcissists. I'm attractive enough that I ended up dating a multimillionaire. She turned out to be controlling and violent and trapped me into a lease that I couldn't afford to leave, all because she liked that I was intimidatingly attractive. I won't make that mistake again. I was unattractive for the beginning of my life into my teens, then around my sophomore year, I became fairly attractive, lost weight, started taking care of myself, etc. The difference in the way people treated me was one of the worst things ever. Everyone was so nice, giving me so much attention, men especially. Once you realize how important looks are to social standing, your life changes a lot in a bad way. My senior year, I had gained all the weight back and all of that attention was gone. Now that I'm 27, I'm still very overweight, but I've learned how to be more confident and comfortable with myself and have attracted attention from people that actually care about me and not how I look. But it's a total mind frick for sure. My first summer job was in tech support. One of my co-workers was one of those human beings you'd just be in awe of if you met them. She was brilliant, Dean's List, biomed student, skipped a grade in school, and also unbelievably pretty. Gymnast turned varsity cheerleader. We had virtually no work to do and just kind of goofed around watching movies or chatting about stuff. Some of the things I remember her telling me about at the time were male friendships not feeling genuine because they were waiting to swoop in once she was single, finding it hard to be taken seriously for her intelligence sometimes, creeps, unwanted attention in public, not directly, but the sense that outside her family and a small group of her very trusted friends, that she might have felt like friendships were superficial. I just derived that from the cheerleader drama stories she shared. I was 18 and had just finished first year of uni as a socially awkward kid anyways, so none of this made sense to me, but looking back I learned a lot from her about stuff like that. People automatically assume that you're swimming in romantic prospects and oftentimes take up a bitter attitude to you for it. The worst I've encountered, while attending a party with a friend and an ex-girlfriend, one Italian girl suddenly stared at me for several minutes. Then later on she went to talk a bit to my ex and said, "I cannot believe he's your boyfriend, he's so handsome." What the frick? Then she came back at me while I was talking with my friends and waited there for maybe 15 minutes, staring at me, trying to talk to me. I didn't know at this point why she went up to my girlfriend and I was feeling something was really off, so I've only really looked at her once in this and never really answered her. She left later on and then I've learned what she said to my girlfriend. These people aren't the worst, I mean they're not murderers or anything, but in my opinion they really suck as human beings because they do not realize the damages they can do with such small talk and behavior. You're never left alone in public. If you do something weird, people are much more likely to notice. But it's far more acceptable to be weird when you're attractive. Being weird as an attractive person is seen as quirky. Headphones, always. You can't admit how much effort it takes for a huge component of attractiveness. Fitness. So you just have to let people think that you're lucky to be so thin and that it's not a deliberate effort to get sleep, prioritize health, etc. I'm not attractive necessarily, but I'm fit at an age where many of my peers are convinced that getting fat and frumpy is automatic, and it's hard to navigate. I've tried not to counteract what some of these people say so as to not taint their perspective, but I will weigh in as a man of average to low looks but a weird metabolism. Some of us can do no exercise and eat junk food for a year and still look pretty lean and muscular, even if in reality we're kind of weak. So I say the last point isn't universal, but maybe slightly more at an older age. I knew a girl in college who was stunning and smart. She was a med student, and she also had a large chest. She could not have a normal relationship with anyone, women or men. Women were highly jealous, and men couldn't talk to her face. I imagine it made her feel intensely lonely. Overweight most of my adult life. Wife and I lost a lot of weight together and are now in fairly good shape. I never get used to hugs from the women in our social circle. Now I get a lot of attention and greetings hugs. It's a weird change. Wife is wearing more dresses, nothing overly sexy, just very attractive. I noticed most guys we meet watching her walk away or looking her over. We're very committed to each other, so it's not a worry, just weird to have the attention. People stop taking you seriously. It takes far more effort to get a salient point across. Depending if this is a con for you, extra attention. Quite frankly, if you're a woman, it's more difficult to be taken seriously at work, since people will think you're just a pretty face. Conversely, if you're in a client role, you may be put in front of the client more often because of your looks. If you're male, good-looking and semi-competent, you'll be promoted through the ranks very quickly, which is a huge pro. In general, regardless of gender, being good-looking does create tension within your gender and social circles, social interactions because you're viewed as competition in the dating pool. People only like the chase. 3 of my relationships eventually faded out because I was sick of hearing, "You're so pretty," and they know nothing of me as a person. I wanted quality time. I wanted someone to know me as a person. They ended up saying, "You're too nice, you're so caring, I don't deserve you," and it ended. I felt used. At the start of relationships, they go out of their way to do such special nice things for you. They're in it for the chase only. Definitely creeps. In the same vein, I cannot stand staring. It's a cultural thing, but subconsciously, I take it as a threat or challenge. Also, you can get more dates with anyone you want, but 99% of them only want to be physical, not to actually date you as a relationship material. You start to wonder if your personality is the problem. Friends of the opposite gender just don't exist. When I was ugly or overweight, child, teen, I had tons of male friends. As an adult, I've had guys end friendships with me once they found out I wasn't single, or when they decide I'm worth nothing beyond my aesthetic appeal. If they can't do the deed with me, then they want nothing to do with me, other than to stalk my Instagram. I'm sick of, "Men can't be friends with women." No, you just don't see my value beyond my reproductive organs. Being tempered and propositioned by people that didn't care that I was married, engaged, or in relationships themselves. It planted a seed that people are not as loyal as the perception they tell their significant others, and I brought it home at one point into my marriage. As a man, when someone much younger wants you, it can be intoxicating, and that temptation can be hard to control. Furthermore, when you reject some of these ladies, they go from wanting to screw you at first sight to mean and nasty and full of name-calling just because you won't cheat. Those good-looking people can be hiding evil minds. The older and less attractive I get, the better people in general seem to treat me. When I was young, late teens to early 20s, women were nasty and men wanted me for one reason and one reason only, which is also nasty. I was subject to some pretty unsavory behavior and called degrading names. When you're treated nicely, it's for ulterior motives. Now, I get along with other women, and nobody is unnecessarily and inexplicably nasty to me, and I've actually made decent male friends. Nobody has tried to screw me for social points in years. In general, people take me more seriously and make far less assumptions about my personality and my background. When you're attractive, people tend to assume that everything else in your life is or has been great too, and I swear they used to imagine me living on daddy's yacht, sunbathing, and only lifting a finger to go shopping, based on the assumptions people used to make about me and the way they treated me. I had a few older men call me princess and act like I needed to be taught lessons about hard work and friendship, which was infuriating because my family was homeless when I was growing up, and I've been working since I was 14. But when you're pretty, people take one look at you and ask, "What would you know?" Overall, people behave very strangely around people they view as conventionally attractive, and they make a lot of assumptions. There's a lot of bias, and that is a massive con. People almost never accurately judged me as a person. I felt like many people looked at me, but nobody actually saw me. Getting older has been a relief. People ask me actual questions about who I am and where I come from now. Far less people look at me, but I feel more seen than I ever did as an attractive young woman. I can't wait to turn 40. Now that I work in a female-dominated environment, I take extra care to make the younger, beautiful women feel seen and not just looked at. I like this approach of using your experience from both sides of the perceived aesthetic aisle and using it to empathize with those who suffer from the undue prejudices of society. People think your feelings can't be hurt. They assume your confidence is at a 100 and they can criticize your whole look without ever hurting you. Or maybe they want to hurt you for it. And it's difficult to get people to listen to the content of what you're saying. And you can say something insanely profound and be hit with, "Well, you're too pretty to worry about such things." The assumptions people make, that's the sucky part. You're more likely to experience manipulation or be outright preyed upon. For women, people won't take you seriously, and if you marry an unattractive guy with money, you'll probably be seen as a trophy wife by others. Other girls may find you threatening. If you have a friend of the opposite gender, their partner may find you threatening. My job has put me in positions with female models, and the main things I've noticed are a lot of people neg them. It's like they can't imagine this beautiful person can be nice or smart, so they constantly chip away at them, and many times it works. Being attractive doesn't bring down the cost of bacon. Getting constantly hit on by a gender you're not into. Boyfriend and I are both decent looking and straight, and 80% of people who hit on us are the same gender as us. We both give off gay vibes without trying, I guess. I'm not even that attractive, and yet going to clubs and stuff gives me the ick. Like, I love dancing and hanging out with my friends, but I'm so sick of creeps trying to grab me, or just following me around or whatever. If I'm on a night out these days, I usually only go to clubs and bars if I'm with a mixed group of friends of guys and girls, because as soon as it's just girls, random guys seem to think it's an invitation to get all up in our faces. Usually they leave me alone if I'm also with male friends, but even then, it doesn't always work. I just want to be able to dance without being grabbed or touched. Health inspectors. What's the worst violation you've ever seen? Former inspector here, I once discovered a rat infestation in the kitchen of a hospital. They asked me if I could prove my suspicions, and I pointed out the numerous foodstuffs with 1 to 2 inch circular holes chewed in them, but they didn't seem convinced. I showed them the trail of droppings and footprints coming and going from a hole in the floor drain, but they still didn't seem convinced. I showed them the 3 dead rats I discovered under and around equipment. I think they began to believe me at that point. Citations included rat infestation and absolutely deplorable cleaning practices. Used to have a job working as an inspector for storage tanks at places like dairies and factories. Went to a cheesecake factory, an actual factory for cheesecakes, not the restaurant chain, to test a milk storage tank. It had just been cleaned and was being prepped to be filled with a tanker full of milk. I noticed the floor of the tank was covered in bleach. It turned out the floor manager couldn't be asked to spend the time sucking out the rest of the cleaning fluid used in the cleaning process and, as a standard, just filled the tank with milk on top of dozens of gallons of bleach. His theory was that there was enough milk to dilute the bleach to acceptable consumption levels. I wrote a report and he was promptly fired. By the way, my 12-gallon estimate is just that, an estimate. It was a huge milk storage silo, 40,000 litres if I recall, and roughly half an inch of the floor of the tank was covered in cleaning fluid. The dilutions we're talking about probably wouldn't have been harmful or even tasteable after being pasteurized and mixed with cheesecake ingredients. But that's also a guess, and it's also not the point. My gosh, you already went through the trouble of cleaning it. What the heck was an extra 5 minutes to properly finish the job? Glad he got fired. It was something to do with the extra attachment he'd need to use for the nozzle, or something. Either way, it would have been an extra 30 minutes of work. Something, had he observed, would have kept his job and a clean criminal record. In 2004, 2005, around that time, I drank some milk that had been in a similar situation. Machine wasn't rinsed after cleaning. I was a toddler and got hospitalized. How often does this crap happen? Worked in a restaurant. Sitting in the office one day, I hear an awful squeaking/shrieking noise. Took me a little while to find the source. The source turned out to be a mouse, stuck in some old spilled pancake syrup under a storage shelf, being eaten alive by the mouse stuck next to it. I have had to edit out the several minutes of gagging and string of expletives that I just uttered after imagining that story. You're welcome, viewers. Did food safety inspection at a large slaughterhouse for a while. We did our own inspections each shift and the government inspector stopped by once a day too. One day I came around a corner and one of the workers who was running service for the butchers had dropped a ham on the floor. So the proper way to handle this was for him to leave it there and call for a re-inspector to come pick it up, take it out to carve off any contaminated bits, and rinse it in boiling water. Now, it relatively often happened meat was dropped on the floor, it's just very, very hard to avoid it when running in a factory setting with human labor. So this was common. What was uncommon was what the guy did. First, he tried catching it as it fell, which would have been fine. No contact with any surface, and he could have just thrown it back into the tub it had fallen out of. He didn't catch it though, it landed on the floor. Thinking that no one was watching, he tried picking it up and dropped it again. He did this 3 times, so first and foremost he's not supposed to be touching anything that's been on the floor. It cross-contaminates his hands, and he has nowhere to put the contaminated product anyway. But he did this 3 times and dropped it 3 times. Freshly carved hams can be slippery when wearing vinyl gloves. He then, out of pure frustration and annoyance at the unwieldy ham, dropped down on all 4s and proceeded to pick up the raw, freshly cut, 6-kilo ham by his teeth. stood up, ham dangling from his chompers, and dropped it into the tub with around 600 kilos of product, and drove off with the tub for processing. He was fired a few minutes after that, and the entire tub of product was discarded. I followed him and let him park the tub before I did a very cliché type of scene. I wish you'd interrupted him while he had the ham in his mouth. Well, yes and no. Had he picked up the ham by his teeth and carried it to the grinder for disposal, technically he had just packed up contaminated product and had to change his clothes and gloves. Of course, carrying anything in your mouth, whatever it fricking is, doesn't fly. But a straight, no prior warning firing? I'm not so sure. Probably though, that wouldn't have been up to me. But when he put it in with the clean product and drove it off to processing, that shows a complete disregard for any sort of understanding of what you should and should not do when working with food. He had made the decision himself even before I dragged him into the office of the shift director. There was no other option. Not a health inspector, but a Chinese buffet near me was closed down because it got a 0 out of 5 in its inspection. I got food poisoning from there once. The staff just got up and left. Locked the door, never went back. All the food was still out and everything. A week later, a man was walking his dog past said Chinese buffet and heard a loud buzzing noise. Looked through the window to see hundreds of thousands of flies had taken to the building as their new home. Was so bad that Pizza Hut next door had to close too. To anyone asking, this was in Gloucester, England. God damn, get a flamethrower in there. Pools that have absolutely no chlorine. Pedicure tubs filters that have never been changed. All their disinfectants were expired. A restaurant that refused to clean up pest feces or urine and refused to properly reheat foods. The kitchen had exposed wood everywhere. Well, it would be exposed if there wasn't a thick layer of grease and no sanitizer. The pools that have no chlorine things happens all the time. As a former pool manager, I can tell you almost right away too when I get unchlorinated water. Chlorine is volatile and will dissipate quickly, especially when it's sunny out. If you're running an outdoor pool and not constantly monitoring the chlorine concentration and the feeds, it will turn into a pond in about 6 hours. At that point, you're just taking a bath with everyone in your town. Also, really shallow baby pool? You can be almost sure that at least once a day it has no chlorine in it. When you're dealing with less than 1,000 gallons, that thing will vacillate like crazy. Well, thank you for that. If you'll all excuse me, I'll just be busy never swimming again in another pool for the rest of my life. In fact, after reading most of these, maybe I'll just never leave my house. When my son was 5 or so, we had a nanny who used to look after him, and she used to take him to a local pub where one of her friends worked. He got used to sitting at the bar, eating a packet of crisps, and drinking a soda. I'm starting to realize as I recount this, as it doesn't reflect too well on my parenting skills. Oh well, he's 17 now, so I guess it's too late for social service to come and take him away. Anyway, the nanny was great, no matter what you might say. The nanny and her friend were around the corner in the other bar, chatting away, when a couple of besooted gentlemen wandered into the bar. My son was laying a line of crisps along the bar, and one of the gents started talking to him. It's worth noting that the regulars in the bar were used to him being there, and often referred to him as the boss. They let him pour drinks and so on, ostensibly under the supervision of the bar staff. Needless to say, it's illegal for 5-year-olds to be employed as bar staff, even in the UK. "I'm in charge here. Would you like a drink?" offered my son, scooting around the back of the bar. No, it's okay, thanks. What are the crisps for?" "Oh, I'm feeding my friend," my son replied. "Really? Where's your friend?" "He lives in that little hole." My son pointed to a hole in the wall toward the end of the bar. "And sometimes he comes out and I feed him." On cue, a small mouse appeared out of the hole, ran along the bar, and started eating the crisps. The men were environmental health officers. The pub was shut down that week and never reopened. Luckily, they weren't police, otherwise the nanny's friend would have been in serious trouble. This story was pieced together from the report of the nanny and also my son, who thought the whole thing was hilarious. The nanny's friend was quite relieved as she hated the job anyway. My favorite Chinese restaurant got shut down. My ex-wife worked for the city, and I asked her what the deal was. She said the health inspectors found something leaking from the ceiling. They lifted the ceiling tile and shined a flashlight and saw multiple eyes staring back at them. It was chickens. They were raising chickens in the ceiling, and chicken crap was dripping into the food that I had been eating at least once a week. "How do I get out of this chicken crap outfit?" "You secure that crap, Hudson." My dad worked pest control, and after working that job, he can no longer eat Chinese food. He said that nearly every Chinese restaurant he had to work in was disgusting and crawling with roaches. But the one that took the cake was when he had to strip down in the kitchen after a ceiling tile broke and roaches fell into his overalls. My dad did pest control. I went to hang out with him one night, and he took me to a Chinese food restaurant. When we were done eating, he was lingering over his tea, and I was like, "Hey, Dad, looks like they're closing up soon. I think we're keeping the folks from getting done." He's cool and calm. It'll be fine. So we sit. He pays the bill, and we wait. Finally, they're shutting off the lights out front, and I'm losing my mind. I'm horrified, embarrassed, and I'm thinking, these poor people. Finally, Dad stands up and says, "Be right back." He comes back in with his gear. He proceeds to treat the place for their rat problem and the roaches. He gets me to help him carry and move stuff so he can do his job, and doesn't see any problem with this. In conclusion, Pest Control Dad treats a restaurant for nasties right after we eat there. My stepdad used to be a baker in an authentic recreation of an 18th century New French fortress. Because they sell bread to the public, the health inspector came by, and she was ripping into my stepdad for violations like the stonework walls, the doorless entryways, or the lack of mosquito zappers. He pointed out that they were following the highest standards except for things that would destroy the authenticity of his 18th century bakery. The health inspector relented and agreed to give him a pass after verifying the food storage area was secure. They went to the shed, which was a doorless building attached to the bakery. As the health inspector went in, there happened to be an escaped cow licking all the loaves. My stepdad could only say, honestly, this never happens." They passed the health inspection. In conclusion, health inspector witnesses escaped farm animal licking all the bread in a bakery and passes the health inspection anyway. Does your stepdad live in a sitcom? That would explain a lot. Like the laugh track that plays any time he cracks a joke, even if it starts only the two of you in the room. My name is Cow, and when at night, or when the moon is shining bright, and all the men have gone to bed, I stay up late, I lick the bread. My friend was inspecting a restaurant and walked out the back to find a man stirring a huge pot of curry. With his arm. No spoon or anything. Just up to his hairy elbows in curry. I'd be more worried about how cold the curry is that he was able to stick his arm in it. Most people in the food industry have insane tolerance to heat. I've not worked in a commercial kitchen for some time, and I can still pick up a pan out of the oven with my fingertips for a brief period of time. Can confirm, people would warn me that something was too hot to touch, and I'd be like, "It's cool, I have waitress hands." Or alternatively, "Fire cannot kill the dragon." I like to think it's more a case of working in the service industry kills your will to live, so you become indifferent to the plates burning your hands. As a man with asbestos hands, I can confirm, coffee machines, kitchens, and hot plates will give you a D&D-style fiendish resistance to fire. However, on the topic of stirring curry with one's own arm, you are likely better off leaving it to tools. Unless you're the following commenters. Is there a different way to stir curry? Well, only if you're really well hung. I had a health inspector tell me this story. There was a family in which both the elderly mother and a handicapped sibling used wheelchairs. Another sibling lived in the house with them and did all the driving, etc. The health department got a phone call from the local wheelchair company. The brother stopped by and picked up a new, custom-built wheelchair for his sister and for his mother, and returned within about 30 minutes, saying that the sister's wheelchair hadn't been made to the right specifications. It was too small. After he left, the staff noticed several roaches on the chair, so the guy got a call. Apparently, it was summer, Midwest, both hot and humid, and the house was all locked up with no open windows for ventilation, curtains drawn, etc. The inspector entered the house and said it was so stifling hot that he started to get dizzy, and he thought hallucinate. He said there was a sound like leaves rustling in the fall, and the walls and floors were kind of vibrating. He then realized it was because they were literally covered in roaches. He immediately evacuated the 3 people living there, and the next day they tented and sprayed the house. He went in a Tyvek suit and knee-high rubber boots, and said that the dead roaches were about 2.5 feet deep in most parts of the house. I work in a bar in Japan that was connected to a bowling alley and an A&W. Mostly Japanese work there. I'm American, and that place was spotless. Every night at 11 when they left there, they were scrubbing everything. I almost stepped on a guy cleaning the baseboards. You could taste the difference in the food because they kept everything so nice. My girlfriend started working in a frozen yogurt shop. The first week, she decided to clean the yogurt machine one night. The entire inside tank was covered in slimy green and brown mold. Oh, and the shop next door was a hoity-toity gym that catered to mirror-gazing health nut gym rats that just loved that low-cal slime mold yogurt. I haven't eaten frozen yogurt since. When I went to culinary school, one of the professors made the statement, If you want to know how clean a restaurant's kitchen is, go to the bathroom first before you're seated. If the bathroom is dirty, there's a good chance the kitchen is in the same condition. This is what I do when I enter dives. It's a hell of a lot harder to clean a kitchen than a restroom. If you can't do that, you can be damn sure they don't give a frick about the difficult stuff. While this works for restaurants, it does not work for bars or pubs, except at 11 a.m. A pub's restroom goes really filthy about 15 minutes after the drinking starts. There's dirty, and then there's dirty. Superficial, day-old dirt looks quite different from consistent neglect. Not a health inspector, but my mum used to work at this restaurant where the owner just did not give a crap. It was a Mexican restaurant, and my mum told me once that a lady came in asking for caldo de res, a beef soup, but they didn't have any more meat, at least the one that's used for that dish. They were about to let the lady know when the owner stepped up and told the lady that her food would be right out. The server and my mum were both confused as to what she was going to do. Well, this lady goes and literally digs through the fricking trash and pulls out some beef, some still with bone, and then she ran it through water, cooked it, and served it to that poor lady. My mum says the lady was even sucking the bone and she almost felt sick watching. My mum quit that job soon after. After writing this, I asked my mum again about it, and here is what she said. The bone/meat was not raw, it was left over from people who had ordered the same thing. They'd almost run out of that soup, and all the meat was gone, so they thought they couldn't serve anymore. The owner grabbed the bone from the trash, rinsed it and threw it back in what was left of the soup, heated up for a bit, and just served it. Just thought I needed to clarify this. I've worked at places that have gotten 100% on multiple occasions. The inspectors are usually the same few people in smaller areas and get to know people in the restaurants. If you have a good reputation, they come in and check the basics, give you a couple of soft infractions, and move on. If you have something that is a major violation, they will start to, rightfully, nitpick everything. I'm hearing a ton of horror stories and just want to point out something about my experience. I've worked at places the inspectors were easy on because they knew it was clean and had a good reputation. I've worked at one place that ended up having to get a follow-up and quit it soon after. That was the only time I'd seen anything too sketchy. I also worked at a place that regularly got 100% ratings, and let me tell you, we were not 100%. The owner wouldn't do crap to improve conditions either. Mice, several kind of bugs, ceiling literally leaking nasty-ass water, on some areas onto the food prep areas, and once the walk-in cooler broke for an entire 24-hour period, and he said to just keep the food like it didn't happen. If my experience in the restaurant business has told me anything, it's that all restaurants are freaking disgusting. But they won't get you sick most of the time, so if you don't think about it, it'll all be okay. Yep, I've worked in places that honestly were bursting at the seams with unsafe and unsanitary infractions just waiting to happen. Worked in some of them for years and somehow never saw a report on them. I worked as an assistant cook in a restaurant. 2 weeks into the job, I opened a cupboard to get a can of tomato sauce, and I see a huge tarantula scuttling away behind the cans. I told the boss what I'd seen so that maybe we should get someone to deal with the huge spider living in the kitchen. Boss turns to me and says, "I see you've met Eduardo. Just don't put your hand too close to him, and you'll be good." Later, another cook proceeded to tell me that the spider had been living in there for 2 years and they allowed it because it kept the rodents and roaches away. This is a true story, so know this. Every time you think about swatting a spider, remember that there's a possibility that a friendly spider is guarding your favorite restaurant's food against nasty critters. The spiders in my house and I have a verbal agreement that is pasted onto every generation of spider that takes up residency in my house. You may remain in my house as long as you don't come upstairs and you keep the ants, flies, and other household bugs that aren't you out of my house. I reserve the right to eliminate you and your webs at will without proper notice. I haven't had an ant in 4 years. I've had a few flies, but they seem to only be upstairs where the spiders aren't allowed. I've killed very few spiders. It's a good arrangement. Not a health inspector, but I've witnessed some things at my first job as a set-up waitress at a banquet hall. The head cook had some hairy arms and he always mixed the salad with his hands, so you know that hair is getting in there, and one day we found a used Band-Aid in the salad. I survived the assassination attempt. My stepmother is the lead health inspector for a decent-sized suburban town. While I've never asked what the worst thing she witnessed as part of her job was, I do know that one instance was pretty gross. A truck full of lobsters was traveling down the highway and crashed. The police came and eventually they towed the truck. As a Board of Health inspector, my stepmother was consulted to see if any of the lobsters were viable, and she told them no. The load is a total loss since there were literally lobsters scattered across the highway covered in dirt and sand, etc. Fast forward 24 hours and one of the restaurants in town ran a special, twin lobsters for $19. Apparently the owner of the trucking and towing company knew the restaurant owner pretty well, so they made a deal whereby the restaurant would pay a very discounted price for the road lobsters. The restaurant would turn around and illegally serve the lobsters to unsuspecting customers or sell them out of a truck behind the restaurant. I'm not sure what the repercussions were, but I think they were shut down for like a week. They closed shortly thereafter, and now there's a new restaurant there. The towing company lost their contract to tow vehicles and semi-trucks with the town and the state. It's crazy that they didn't think the health inspector would figure it out. It's their job. Mysteriously cheap lobster after a huge highway crash involving lobsters? I thought that there would be insurance for things like lobster crashes. And now I realize how ridiculous that was as I typed it. Never mind. You aren't covered for lobster crashes on your insurance plan? Weird. Insurance agent here. If you buy lobster crash insurance, we will find a way to not pay anything at all. It was an act of cod. Close enough. Talking 10 years as an inspector. Most dangerous is usually not the most disgusting. I've seen entire walk-in coolers at 55 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit, and the staff didn't even notice anything wrong. I've seen piles of mice that died getting stuck in grease behind the fryer. I've seen staff throwing raw burgers within the grill, then making a salad right after with their bare hands. I've seen squirrels and birds roaming freely inside a bread manufacturer. The stereotypes, unfortunately, are true. Chinese restaurants are almost always filthy. The most common critical violation? Dish machine not sanitizing properly. What's the most petty, passive-aggressive move you've ever played? I just hit the passive-aggressive zenith. Played a YouTube video of someone eating crisps loudly while someone else ate crisps loudly, because I can't be bothered to ask them to stop. Basically, this guy is one of those people who manages to do everything that is annoying. Whether it's banging desks, talking loudly on the phone, laughing loudly, munching crisps with his mouth open, etc., all distracting in our very small office. I'm not saying I'm not a prick, but I'm tired of picking the guy up on things he should be able to work out for himself. Has anyone else surprised themselves with their own petty behavior? As pointed out, it probably isn't properly passive-aggressive. The reason I didn't directly approach the guy is because I've done it so many times with so many other things that he's becoming combative and resistant. I'm tired of getting into semi-pissy debates, and I'm at the point where I think he should start actively taking responsibility for the things he does in the small office we share. I always ask if people mind if I put on music or close curtains, etc. I was on the receiving end of some epic passive aggression once. I was in the 12 items or less line at the grocery store, and as usual had counted my items before I got in the line. An older couple got in line behind me and clearly did not think I had done so. They spoke loudly to each other, I guess hoping to embarrass me. "That doesn't look like 12 items to you, does it, Marge?" etc. This continued on, and when it was my turn, one started, "Let's count. 1, 2, 3. I started wondering if maybe I miscounted, feeling a little panicky as I usually try not to be a D-bag. Then finally, 10. Oh! The cashier laughed. I needed to do nothing. The backfiring of their plan was plenty. Although I now look on that situation with that single regret. I should have also written a check, asked for paper and plastic, and for rolls of quarters. Darn it. I would have grabbed 3 packs of gum and put them on the belt with my stuff just to screw with them after that little act. I used to be a resident advisor in a college dorm. One of the dorm activities was on personal hygiene, with free stuff available like deodorant, shampoo, razors, etc. One of my residents couldn't be bothered to speak with his roommate about his disgusting habits, but he sure took about a dozen of those flyers and put them up all over his roommate's side of the room. Ah, that's like a lower effort version of the good old post-it note. Best friend of any passive-aggressive flatmate. The neighbor in my girlfriend's apartment will let their gosh darn alarm go off for like a good 5 minutes before they even try to stop it. They don't hit snooze like a normal person. They just lay there and let it buzz over and over and over again. It was going on longer than usual, so I ended up pulling out my phone and turning on the meltdown alarm and basically pressing it directly into the wall. On top of the horrendously loud noise, it was also buzzing the whole wall. They turned their alarm off within 10 seconds and haven't done it since. If this ever happens again, get a screaming mini alarm clock from any truck stop. It's 110 decibels of get the frick out of bed. Treat it like a grenade. Set it for 1 minute, it's a timer, and toss it in their window. It's brought people to tears because they couldn't turn it off. Oh, thank you for that wonderful idea. My neighbors don't have a problem with their 16-year-old son and his idiot friends going out at 2 a.m. drunk as frick in their backyard, yelling and screaming till the sun comes up. Nobody around will say anything because I live with a bunch of old fricks and I don't want them damaging my car. So I just ordered one of these. This Sunday, I'm throwing it in their yard the second they decide to go in, because they always go out every weekend and do this crap. It's going to be so worth the money, even if I have to do it every weekend. My old roommate's friend always used to come over and drink my cans of Pepsi. I'm on a pretty tight budget, but like to treat myself with said cans, so you can imagine how upset this made me. One day I hid all the cans but one, which I coated with nail biter. The second he realized something was wrong, he poured himself a glass of water using the only glass on the drying rack, the glass coated in nail biter. I live on a typical American suburb street. My neighbor just got a new job with a company-provided vehicle. He has a one-lane driveway, so he parks this huge work van in the road, directly in front of my house. It's all I can see when I look out the front window. I casually mention it to him now, so that he could park it in front of his house and not mine. He just chuckles to himself and starts talking about something else. For the next week, I parked my car in front of his house to see if he enjoyed looking at my car every day. Luckily, he got the message and now parks in front of his home and not mine. Something similar is happening where I live. I live at the end of a cul-de-sac in the corner, and the guy in the middle of the end parks one of his cars outside his house, blocking our driveway to the point where we have to snake around his car in reverse. Meanwhile, his other car sits in his driveway that is thin but long enough for two cars. Did I also mention that both he and his wife are retired and rarely leave the house? We have other neighbors with similar situations, so everyone keeps moving their cars like a game of chess to park in front of each other's houses to annoy each other. They are all gradually getting more and more teed off with each other, and just when they are at the tipping point, I'm soon to be adding a new car to the scenario. I will park it in the worst place and watch the drama. Skip passive-aggressive, go fully aggressive. Buy a beta car, spend under $500. Insure minimally. Put the beta in your driveway. Wait until your neighbor blocks your driveway. Nail the neighbor's car. Blame the neighbor for being parked in front of your driveway. Take no responsibility. Repeat until the point has been made. Sell the beta for whatever you paid for it. I blow kisses to angry drivers. I'm a guy. On an airplane flight this past summer, the guy in front of me reclined his seat until he was practically resting his head on my chest. I politely asked him if he would please put his seat up. He just looked at me and said no. I then turned my air vent on full blast, aimed it right at his face. When he reached up to adjust it, I pushed his hand away. "Excuse me, that's my air vent. I like it that way." He ended up leaning forward the entire flight, but left his seat reclined practically to my chest. We were both uncomfortable the entire flight, but neither of us would give in. As my wife put it, "So this is what happens when an inconsiderate butthole meets a passive-aggressive pee-pee." Later, several people have called bullcrap on my claim that the seat tilted back all the way to my chest. I'm 5'10" and my legs aren't long so that my knees will touch the seat in front of me. For that reason, I don't usually have a problem with people in front of me leaning back. I don't really enjoy it, but it's not a big deal. I don't know if this guy's seat was broken or if it was some sort of sleeper sofa unit that belonged in a long-haul flight or what, but I ended up looking down on that guy's face like I was his dentist. It sucked. I was at Costco once and they had massage chairs at the end of the aisle, right by the crutches and folding wheelchairs, etc. Two older women were complaining about me using it, making remarks about how I was abusing the equipment or some crap, so I struggled to get off the chair, gave a look of pain and wheeled off in one of the wheelchairs. I kept one of my hands shaking and went right past them. Their faces were one of the best things ever. In conclusion, use muscular dystrophy to screw with someone. Oh my god. I think the most perverse part of this account is that even from the way the author has written it, I'm not 100% sure one way or the other whether they actually have that particular disability or any disability at all. I just hope the ladies in question feel terrible regardless. I was watching Batman at a theater and the kid sitting in front of me kept rocking his seat back and knocking me in the knees. I asked him to stop, he glared, then stopped for 5 minutes. But he started again and kept intentionally rocking it back to hit my knees. So I put my foot at the base of the chair so he couldn't rock it backwards. He turns around, glares at me, and mutters, "B-word." This kid couldn't have been older than 11. So I let him keep rocking and waited until he was winding back to rock it really hard. Then, when he was at his apex, I kicked the back of the seat hard. It smacked him in the head and he whiplashed forward. Needless to say, he didn't lean back for the rest of the movie. In conclusion, I kicked a kid in the back of the head, and I'm not entirely certain what passive-aggressive means. You delivered the kick that the kid needed, but not the one he wanted. Some men just want to watch the chairs rock.
He merely adopted the chair. You were born in it.
Let me tell you how I got this whiplash.
When you lean back, you have my permission to die.
There's these two girls who sit behind me in one of my classes that don't shut up. No matter what my professor says, they always have to talk about it between the two of them. After doing this, it's always leading into longer discussions between them. It's freaking annoying because I'm actually interested in what my professor has to say. He tells some pretty interesting stories. One day, I'd had enough of it. When they started talking again, I took my laptop out and made a new Word document. I made the font large enough to where they'd be able to read it and typed 4 simple words. Shut the frick up. I cleared my throat very loudly, I should add, and just slightly moved out of the way to where they would be able to read it. That was 2 weeks ago, and they haven't said a word in class since. I had the same problem in my philosophy class. For about a week, I would type everything that they said. At the end of the week, I handed them each a transcript of their conversations. I pulled the same thing last finals period. I was on the quiet floor of our student center, where not even the laptops are allowed. The clicking of the keyboard is too loud. There was this girl furiously typing on her laptop and having a cell phone conversation about her child termination. It was very, very distracting, and no amount of throat clearing and angry looks got her attention. So I scribbled, "Shut the frick up," in Sharpie on my notebook, coughed loudly, and held it up for her to see. She got up and left, and I got a very enthusiastic round of golf claps. In college, I had the worst roommate. She would stay up all night, sleep all day long, and dramatically sigh or groan if I accidentally woke her up by, being in my dorm room during the day. She also could not shut up for about 5 minutes. She literally wandered around our room muttering to herself mostly, "Frick!" and "Jesus Christ!" And if she wasn't doing that, she was sighing and groaning and slamming drawers shut. She also left food that should have been refrigerated out on her desk for weeks at a time, including stacks of burgers still in their paper wrapping. It smelled. Anyway, she mentioned once how she hated living in the dorms because she couldn't smoke in there. I casually brought up how my last roommate broke her contract and moved into a house mid-semester, and she just loved it. New roommate got excited and started to look into getting an apartment. What I didn't mention was that it costs $1,000 plus that month's dorm fee to break said contract, and apparently she managed to sign up for this without noticing that fine print either, because for about a week after she had screaming matches on the phone with her mum about the money. A week later she was gone and I had the room to myself for the rest of the semester. It was great. I would feel bad, but living with a frantic, swearing, sleep-deprived burger hoarder was too much for me. In conclusion, talked Oscar the Grouch into breaking room contract, resulting in unforeseen expenses on her part. Oofed. I mean, she was probably outright told by student housing that it would cost her money, so hopefully decided to move despite that fact of life. It just sucks that it sounds like her mother had to foot the bill. Mine is a painful memory to relive, but I'll do it for the sake of this thread. Me and my then-university roommate shared this tiny room with one double-decker bed, a cupboard, 2 tables, and a mirror. The mirror is depressingly important in this story. It was opposite the bed so that I, sleeping on the top bunk, could actually see what my roommate was doing underneath. You know where this is going. So one day I woke up to this horrible squelching sound. In my mind, I knew what it was. I just didn't want to entertain the idea. It must not be that. It can't be. Furtively, I glanced at the mirror, knowing that the reflection would take a little bit of my soul with it. Sure enough, it was my roommate, under my bunk, pumping vigorously in his boxers. I have never seen anyone beat it that feverishly. It was almost beautiful in some sick, perverse way. Okay, so the problem was that he kept doing this. I kept waking up to the sound of the guy who watches Matrix Reloaded daily, frantically beating off in his boxers. Even worse, sometimes he'd let out an ugh sound that chills me to this day. I cannot watch Japanese adult flicks because of him. I didn't even know what to do. Should I accept my fate and consider this morning jerk session as some kind of cruel alarm clock? One fateful day I was woken up to the usual squelching sound, and I decided to do something about it. I just cleared my throat. He immediately stopped. And it was then that he knew I knew. We never spoke again, and he moved the following semester. You fricker. I know you're on Reddit. If you're reading this, I'm going to come and spank the monkey in front of you one day. Drunk. You mother fricker. I wish I'd employed a similar passive-aggressive tactic on the guy who sits directly behind me. He's insanely annoying, such that he's infamously never sat with his actual team. They rush to fill any seats that come free, and there's a long list of people who've said, "If you sit me near him, I will quit. Seriously." Highlights include, he seems to have old smoker's lung/throat problems, such that his voice always escapes as a gurgled squeal. He can't help that, but he shouts, of course, so it's akin to sharing the room with a banshee. He spends hours per day cramming Bombay mix into his mouth. He then chews it with his front teeth for maximum crunch volume. He'll still use the phone or shout at people while eating. Farts openly and often. Has an incredibly loud and annoying SMS received tone, which needless to say is triggered several times per hour, sometimes many times a minute as he conducts some sort of his extracurricular activities exclusively by SMS. Of course, his desk phone habits are annoying too. Keypad tones set to on, volume set to max, and he opens many conversations using the speaker setting. He has dozens of keys plus his security tags on a long chain which he slaps and drags about on his desk, like he's a fricking poltergeist. That's right, he's a banshee and a poltergeist. I cracked after weeks of this and told him to shut the frick up. On a Friday morning when he was screeching at the team opposite solidly for an hour telling his version of what passes for a joke. He responded with abuse, so I went unpunished, but I still know I made a mistake being aggressive and swearing at work. On second thoughts, I wish I'd killed him with a stapler. I'm a live sound tech. My job's success rate depends on me being passive-aggressive. Oh, you turned your guitar amp up again? Cool, I hope you like me cranking the crap out of your guitar in your monitors now, butthead. I've been to shows where the band members straight up sit there and yell at the techs. Isn't that someone you should be polite to, considering they can make your entire set sound like crap? I've been yelled at from some idiot on stage for problems they were creating. Oh, not to mention a room full of people between us. I muted his mics, sipped on a beer, and stood there and smiled at him as he had a tantrum. Does this count? Drunk buttholes being loud outside residence buildings at some ungodly hour on a Sunday night. Hey, do you guys ever watch? A watch? Yeah, I need to know what time it is. 3:30. Okay, cool. Now that you know that it's 3:30, can you shut the frick up? Oh yeah, this one. Had a guy watering his garden at 2:30 a.m. once, in the summer, when you have your windows open. I leaned out. Hey mate, why don't you water your garden at 4 a.m. like normal people? Whenever some butthole is tailgating me on the road, I hit the windshield cleaner button and just hold it. Usually, I can get a good consistent spray of water to obstruct their view. They usually change lanes after that. Bonus points for me if their windshield is dirty and their wipers are bad, leaving behind a dirty, muddy mess. Also, if you're all in on this idea, you can take a pin and adjust the angle on one of your nozzles to spray directly over your car for maximum effectiveness. I had a wagon and it had a rear view sprayer, so I pulled it out and found the best angle to hit tailgaters right in the window. It was awesome. People would either get super mad and go into a rage, or most of the time start laughing and back off. I mean, I can't possibly condone this, as you could cause a crash if they're particularly jumpy and unprepared, but it is damn funny, and I'd be tempted to try it. I put 3 staples in my stapler at a time so people will stop using the one on my desk. There's an empty desk right next to me with a fully loaded stapler no one ever uses. I realize this is ridiculous. I was in Walmart once and this kid was screaming. I tried to ignore it. I thought about asking the parent to quiet the kid down. You could hear him through the whole store. Finally, I just stood at the end of the aisle they were on and started screaming back at him. The mother was horrified, but after about 10 seconds of yelling back and forth, the kid finally stopped. My mother would do the same with me when I was a child. Once I threw myself to the ground and started screaming, and she just lay down beside me and watched me with her poker face until I stopped. It worked every time. Every time I was working on a good tantrum, my mother would offer to clear out a space for me on the floor and tell me to let her know when I was finished. The residents at the pool I work at complain about everything, making the shifts that my co-workers and I work extremely trying on our patients. It eventually got to the point where a number of residents petitioned to get one of the guards written up because she was sucking a lollipop in an inappropriate manner while on stand. As head guard of the facility, all of these complaints went to me. Eventually, I got sick of this and took action. What the residents didn't realize up until about halfway through the summer is that the pool they use has a number of small rules that no one really acknowledges, because honestly, it's not worth anyone's time to enforce them. These rules include things such as enforcing designated areas to eat and a sort of blanket ban on alcohol. From July 25th on, under my authority, every guard was required to reprimand all residents on every single infraction, in order to give them a taste of their own medicine. I can honestly say there is nothing more satisfying than having one of my guards stop a hated resident from enjoying a few drinks with whoever they're with, and then looking them right in the eye and just absorbing their hatred. It's sublime. When I was pretty young, maybe 13-ish, my younger brother, 11-ish, kept frustrating me by stealing my CD player, and I was out for clever revenge. We had a CD recorded by a band from the local church called Flying Sheep. Something something Jesus and flying animals, you know the drill. The first track of the CD was 45 seconds of sheep noises. When he went to sleep, I snuck into his room quietly, located my CD player, set it to loop track 1 and turned the volume way down. About every 5 minutes I'd sneak in again and turn the volume up a little more. I did this for about 2 hours until there was nothing but bleating sheep at full volume about 4 feet from his head. My brother slept like a log, so he slept for the whole 7 hours, with sheep noises beamed directly into his brain. He woke up pretty angry. Apparently he had dreamed about trying to herd aggressive sheep all night long. Sweet revenge. If someone is really annoying me with what they're saying, or chewing loudly, smacking gum loudly, or making annoying drum noises with their mouth, I will sometimes turn music on and slowly turn it up to the point where I can't hear them over it. Sometimes I will even look them dead in the eyes while I do it. Well, that's better than my sighing tactic. Bravo! Whenever my roommate shaves, he always leaves little bits of hair in and around the sink. As other people's hair has always made me cringe, I repeatedly asked him to stop, but there would always be hair in the sink. So I waited. For 3 months, I grew my pubic hair to the most glorious length it has ever been and shaved it all off into the sink, and left it. I haven't had any problems with my bathroom since then. In conclusion, a wild bush appeared. The last 4th of July, some friends and I went down to the pier to watch the fireworks. We were sitting down when this couple decided the perfect spot for them was standing directly in front of us. I'd been drinking a bit, so it seemed like a good idea to bark like a dog. Not like a mean pit bull or something, more like a high-pitched chihuahua. I do a really good impression, by the way. They started turning around looking for the dog until they realized it was me. I looked them in the eyes and started barking with an even higher pitch. I think they thought I was crazy because they just whispered to each other and left. The old man sitting next to me gave me a high five. Watching my daughter at gymnastics, woman next to me was smacking her gum like a cow. I pulled out a pen and sat there clicking the button until she got fed up and left. Non-Americans. What misconception did you have about America before visiting or moving there? Well, I recently learned that New York is a state as well as a city, and Washington isn't in Washington. A while back I was dating this girl from India who was shocked to discover that Seattle was nowhere near DC. The best part about the naming of Washington State is that it was going to be called Columbia, but people at the time thought it would be too confusing, given that the nation's capital was the District of Columbia. This was before DC was mostly known as Washington, so they picked Washington for the state name instead of Columbia, to avoid confusion. My German friends wanted to go into my arsenal and start shooting with all my pieces. When I told them that I didn't have any, they looked at me like I was lying. I've taken several Germans to the range. It's a pretty awesome experience for them. I don't think they really grasp how bloody expensive the ammo is, though. I don't know if it's a misconception, but I expected Grand Canyon National Park to be less well-maintained. Frankly, it's amazing for the amount of visitors. Visited last year, 10 out of 10. You people have an amazing national park service. This year we decided to come back and tackle Yellowstone, next weekend actually. Hats off to the national parks. That is some public sector crap I hope you people decide to keep investing in. For me, more than cities, they are the crown jewels of the US. The amount of public land in the US is unique and incredible. Thank Teddy Roosevelt and John Muir. They were both amazing men that pioneered the vast national parks of North America. It's true, despite the efforts of certain monetarily motivated entities seemingly working as hard as they can to gut the EPA and park services, America still has some incredibly well-maintained hiking trails and natural wonders. Long may they last. This one's a bit off topic, but hear me out. I grew up watching American movies, American media, American everything, and it became this very familiar place that I'd never been to, and it almost seemed like it was fake, like it was all just one big movie set, and people spoke a made-up language I understood but never heard from native speakers in real life. At that point, my view on America was almost disconnected from reality. When finally visiting America, it was completely surreal. Like I was taking part of those fictional movies I'd seen as a kid. I saw landmarks in cities I had only ever seen on screen. It was a crazy experience. I get that. Even for Americans, there are places in the US that can be like that, especially New York City. I thought you Americans ate pizza every Friday. That's why I wanted to go to the USA in the first place. It's America. You can eat pizza every day. And when pizza's on a bagel, you can eat pizza anytime. I thought sheriffs aren't real for some reason, at least not anymore. At least where I am, police equals city, sheriff equals county, state patrol equals state, but mostly highways and interstates. We have a lot of overlapping law enforcements with weird jurisdiction lines and different protocols. Like where I am in California, in a day you might see highway patrol, county sheriff, and the city police department. In lots of places, sheriffs are more likely to use SUVs, while with PD, SUVs are normally for K9, but some departments are using them as well. Being English, I didn't even think about a language barrier. At a football game, it took me about 5 minutes to get a bottle of water. The girl just couldn't understand how I said water. I had to point to one someone else had had in the end. I'm just sitting here giggling and picturing an extremely frustrated Brit standing at a concession stand just repeating, "Water! Water!" over and over again in a fruitless attempt to get a damn drink. It happens to everyone. I'm from Ohio and I went to visit my aunt and uncle in Georgia. I was trying to order a sandwich, but I couldn't understand the question that the waitress was asking me because I couldn't decipher her accent. My sister had to translate for me. It was pretty embarrassing now that I'm thinking about it. Y'all want mustard and mayonnaise on it? I thought people would say yee-haw a lot more. I'm sorry to disappoint. We failed our jobs as Americans, and I deeply apologize. Oh, and yee-haw. My brother in Connecticut deals with people in China and other countries from work all the time, and he started greeting everyone with howdy, specifically in order to perpetuate the stereotype. Honestly, you guys were a lot friendlier than I expected. Even in New York, which seems to pride itself on not giving a frick, I found people to be extremely friendly, polite, and helpful. It's been great hearing everyone's take on this, and now I have a long list of places to visit in America. Fellow New Yorker here can confirm we do give a frick. Quickest way to get a New Yorker to talk to you, you stare at a subway map for more than a minute. The one thing that breaks us out of our do not talk to strangers shell is when helping with directions. I swear, if you ask the quickest way to get to the Empire State Building, 3 of us will jump in front of you to make sure you get there, and 2 of us may debate about which way to go, even though both of our directions are right and it would take the exact same time. If we're really friendly, we'll even give you a tip to skip the Empire State Building altogether and head to the top of the rock. Better views, no chain link fence, and you can actually get that picture in front of the Empire State Building. Something you can't do when you're standing on top of that building. You can also ask, hey, does this train go to 34th Street? Just to get us talking. Honestly, I think that a lot of the infamous East Coast and New York surliness goes out the window when people realize you're British or European as well. But maybe that was an isolated experience for me. I didn't realize those red cups were actually real and used by everyone in the US at parties. I thought it was just like a movie thing. My mum's friend went to the US and brought us back a stack while we were at university. We felt like we were in a teen film, and we even washed them up when we were done so we could use them again. I thought that I'd have no problem communicating because the people there speak a form of English. I've listened to their accents in my media the whole life, etc. Man, was I wrong. I don't think I spoke to a single person who I didn't have to ask to repeat themselves at least once. This was in Orlando. Oh, this sounds stupid. I knew America was big, but when I thought I could drive from New York to Florida pretty easily, I was so wrong. I just didn't quite register how bloody far away everything is. And I was wrong when I thought alligators just lived in the Everglades. Those frickers are everywhere in Florida. How surprisingly cold some parts of Arizona can get. I visited after spending a year in northern Ohio and basically went there naked, as I didn't expect anything could be worse than Cleveland's winter. Nope, I almost froze to death when I went to see the Grand Canyon and it was snowing. Yes, when I went to the Grand Canyon in October, I showed up in shorts and a tank top, expecting it to be still and hot, like I was in Phoenix. Nope. Not only was it freezing, but it was the windiest place I've been in my entire life. So beautiful, though. When my parents and I moved from Poland to Texas in 1997, we had no idea Daisy sour cream wasn't a cheese spread. Still have it on sandwiches. On a solo road trip up Route 66, I picked up an 18-year-old Dutch kid on his first trip out of his country. He thought all American diners were owned by one company called Diner. That was pretty adorable. My grandmother was an impressionable small-town teenager in the UK during World War II and fell in love with her fair share of American GIs as there were hundreds stationed in her hometown. They took her to dances, swept her off her feet, and left her with a hugely romantic view of life in the USA, bolstered over the years by movies. In 2003, my family took her to Florida on holiday and she was devastated that everyone lived normal lives. That's the nicest thing anyone has ever said about Florida. Thanks! Living in Florida makes me wonder if I'm normal or just less insane than the other residents. I thought Washington was the most serious place in the States, but when I went there for a tour in the White House about 3 years ago, most of the city smelled like green herb. I was very confused. After several replies to my story, I need to clarify I was talking about Washington, D.C. Didn't think it was necessary since I mentioned the White House. I do apologize for any confusion. People think DC equals government, which it does, but they also forget it's an incredibly liberal population. I don't know the numbers now, but it also used to be the gayest city in America by percentage of population, and we know how to party. You get a lot of high-strung young professionals, and they have to blow off steam somehow. People might not believe that DC consistently votes in the 85 to 92% range in favor of the Democratic candidates in each presidential election, regardless of who's currently in office or who the candidates are. I'm not saying that the Dems get 90% more or double the votes than the Republicans. I'm saying that 90% of all votes tallied in the district are in favor of the Democratic candidate. DC is crazy liberal. I got an admit to a school in Texas. I was worried about all the six-shooter slinging cowboys and random shootouts everywhere. 4 years in, and I'm yet to see any of those guys here. I did get to go to a firearms range last year, though. I had an exchange student from Europe recently, and he said his mom said she'd be happy as long as he ended up anywhere in the US except Texas. I live in New Orleans, like in the city. His mom was still happy it wasn't Texas. He said he'd fill her in on the actual danger to him in New Orleans versus Texas when he went home. I visited New York City and had the expectation that everyone would be rushing around and keeping to themselves, but people were so friendly. Like several times a day, girls stopped me in the street simply to say something nice about my hair or outfit. I just found it really strange, but nice. I'm from London, UK, and I guess I'm just used to people avoiding eye contact or talking to strangers. The only downside was the catcalling was heavy and more aggressive than I've experienced anywhere else. I've only been to New York City, LA, Vegas, and Florida, but I've generally always found Americans to be really pleasant and polite. I've had to rethink just how antisocial we are in a lot of Northern European and British cities. Perhaps even if New York is unfriendly by US standards, it's still worlds ahead of Britain in acknowledging people around you. That it was a big country. It's not. It's insanely vast. Stupidly vast. Beyond anything I can compare it to. Returning to the UK after a trip to the US, it feels like I'm visiting Toy Town and everything is just so cute. And I'm English and feel like this after a week or two away. Also, people are a lot less fat than we're led to believe. Yeah, there's some obesity, but no more than I see here in the UK. I also felt massively safer driving in the US than I do in the UK. People seem to drive with a lot more patience and there's a lot less under- or overtaking. In the UK, at any given moment, someone is planning to cut you up or is actively swearing at you a car away for being either too fast or too slow, or not pulling away from the red light the instant it turns amber. Yeah, a lot of people underestimate the physical size of the country. It's common in conversations about travel for Americans to point out the ease of traveling in Europe. Americans don't understand how you can hit 2 to 3 countries in a day or for a weekend. Europeans don't understand that you can drive for 8 hours through Texas and still be in Texas. The East Coast with the smaller states are easier to travel through with transit, but once you get west of DC or Maryland, there isn't transit connecting cities. It's plane, car, or if you're severely unlucky, Greyhound bus or rail. My friend's wife is from Costa Rica. She was shocked to find out that Americans take regular showers when she moved here. I guess most of the Americans she was exposed to growing up were the backpack Costa Rica hippie types who didn't clean themselves much. Thought food was going to be crap for some reason, then discovered that the quality was way better than what I'm used to. Also thought everyone was going to be morbidly obese. Came to Colorado, and 90% of people are fit as frick. I thought Walmart was going to suck. I ended up loving Walmart. I also didn't know Colorado was the fittest state before coming to the US. I know now. As someone from somewhere else in America, I just had the same experience on my first trip to the Rockies. Retirees trail running past us up a 45-degree grade at 10,000 feet above sea level. Wow. I thought that WrestleMania was a huge deal for Americans. I was hoping that it would be like a national holiday. WrestleMania and NASA are my two favorite things about America. So this was very sad for me. Vince McMahon would like to have a word with you about an exciting offer that only costs $9.99 a month. Met a guy from Portugal in Portland, Oregon. He said he was surprised that he hasn't seen anyone get shot in the street yet. He assumed everyone in America carried a piece, and street shootings were extremely common. I'm curious, did he think that they were Western-style shootouts, or more like just random acts of violence? Hell, I'm from Idaho and went to New York for Comic-Con, and got asked how I liked the modern tech available in the city. I was confused until we talked more and realized that he thought we didn't have electricity or cars, and that I used a 6-shooter to shoot coyotes trying to get at my cows. It's not just non-Americans. Not really a misconception, but I was pretty young when I moved to the US from mainland Europe. My parents mentioned that the US was at war with Iraq. This was in 2003, and I was wondering to myself why we were moving to a war zone. I thought there would be air raids and bombings all the time. When I was very young, I thought English people lived in castles and rode horses and went to war with bows and arrows. I didn't understand that the movies I saw were portraying historical England, not contemporary England. That's what they actually do. When you travel to England, they'll take you to the special places for tourists, where they maintain the appearance of a modern lifestyle. However, it's all a big conspiracy because they don't let the tourists go to the real places where the English live in castles and ride horses. Their maps are fake, public transport is rigged, every inhabitant of England is sworn to maintain the secrecy of their true lifestyle. That everyone is as good-looking as the people on TV. We are, but that show is Roseanne. To appreciate the quality of this joke, I had to Google image the show Roseanne, and I guess the joke is that most of you basically look like normal people. Zing. Hollywood. I believed it was wall-to-wall famous people, walking on red carpets dressed in golden gowns, and everything was possible if you just walked on that beautiful boulevard. Wrong. Big time. There was nothing, and I mean nothing worse than when we had out-of-town family visit us, fam lives in SoCal, LA area, and begged to be taken to Hollywood so they could see the Walk of Fame, etc. Even after explaining that it's a dump, they always insisted. And then we'd get there and they'd see what we were talking about, and we'd have to claw our way out after 30 minutes. That area is horrible in the summer. Traffic going in and out is impossible, everything is overpriced, and it's filthy as heck. I had to work for an event designer out there for a year, and that drive was part of the reason I quit so soon. I love LA and all the cities in it, but Hollywood and Venice Beach can go get screwed. That every shop is like Costco, big in bulk and relatively cheap. That the majority of people in the US are fat, racist, and selfish motherfrickers. I couldn't be more wrong. Everyone was very nice, educated, and kind. Unfortunately, the worst people get the most attention inside and outside the US. Rednecks and hillbillies. I thought that it was a geographical thing and you can only see them in the South. The ones I met up north were pretty hostile at first, but turned out to be awesome people in the end. I thought Americans, especially Californians, are sassy and snobbish. I was so wrong about that. They're freaking chill, friendly, and some are really down to earth. I also thought that most are really rich and that they own mansions with swimming pools at the mountains of Hollywood, but no. Most of them live in apartments and houses. My big misconception was I thought life was easy here, that you don't have to do 2 to 4 jobs just to make a lot of money, but unfortunately it was the other way. When I was in high school, a friend's older sister had a German student and a British student visit for Thanksgiving. They were students with her at UT. It was so much fun talking to them about the US and answering all their questions. The best, though, was their questions on the states. They thought Chicago was a state, and were surprised to learn Hawaii and Alaska were states as well. They thought they were a step up from Puerto Rico, but they were surprised to learn they also had representatives and senators. From the outside, the US looked like one country. Once you're there and drive around multiple states, it more seems like many different countries with different accents, laws, regulations, way of life, food. That was a big surprise for me. Misconceptions before moving to America. 1. Americans only work 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. 2. No one works after 12 on Fridays. 3. Americans take a lot of vacations, summer plus Thanksgiving plus Christmas. After moving to America, 1. Everyone is working their butts off. 2. The concept of fixed hours is fuzzy. People log in early and late to get to important stuff at work. And 3. Americans are not getting much time off. Most are not even using their vacation days. I was told the typical stuff before going to the US the first time. The TSA are buttholes, everyone carries a piece, and people are hella unfriendly. I saw more pieces in Schiphol in Amsterdam than I did in O'Hare. Seriously, police with MP5s about every 30 feet. Dogs as well. Very weird. Also, O'Hare freaking stinks. Worst airport in the world. Anyway, yeah, I realize mileage may vary with the TSA, but everyone was friendly, interested in my trip in a good way, and helpful. No issues. Spoke to a police officer like an hour later, super friendly and helpful as well. I was starving, he showed me a good place to eat, and had food himself as well. We talked a bit while eating. Cool guy. Everyone was super talkative and friendly in the US. The talkative part is weird, coming from Sweden. I got compliments on my shirt within an hour of leaving the airport after my second in-country flight. That would basically never happen in Sweden. People here dislike social interaction. In the US, it was like free-for-all talking, joking, and complimenting each other. It was nice. As a resident Swede, this is all completely true for those of us who visit the States from here, as I've alluded to in my previous comments. Having strangers talk to you in a friendly manner is genuinely mind-blowing to us who live here. I've lived in the US permanently since 2015, but I've been coming regularly, 3 to 6 month visits, since 2010. As an Englishman, I signed up for the 2 main stereotypes pre-2010. 1. That all Americans are incredibly obnoxious and loud in public. 2. That everyone in America is a mixture of stupid and fat. Since then, I've evolved my thinking to say the least. 1. They're really not obnoxious, nor are they loud in public. English people are just painfully awkward and shy, hence the crappy handshakes, the lack of eye contact, and the "speak up, you bellend" mumbling of words in public. Trust me, you start to notice this behavior when you've had something to contrast it with. 2. Obviously there are stupid people here, but that is true of any country. It's worth pointing out that I've yet to meet a group of people or a set of individuals as stupid or as cringe-inducing as the people I grew up with in the northwest of England, and I've travelled throughout the south and gone from coast to coast. For instance, I've never once had to explain what a bachelor's degree is in the good old US of A. That was a weekly occurrence after I graduated uni in England. The fat thing is also a bit of a reach too. Americans are typically more health conscious from my experience. I officially became an American a few years ago, but before I first came to the country, I used to believe that American streets would be cleaner than clean and paved with gold. I'm originally from Jamaica. Our streets, back then, were not always as presentable. Then again, it also depends on which area of Jamaica you resided, worked, etc. Anyway, I thought American streets or roads were yellow brick road immaculate. Not sure why I believed that, it wasn't true. They're just as normal as other streets. But I tell you what, it blew my mind when I first saw a street sweeper. That was awesome. I ran into some dude outside of the States that asked me why Americans eat dogs. After maybe not understanding my "what the frick" look for a while, he then asked what hot dogs were. So at the very least, I was able to explain, in freedom terms, what God's gift to man is. Hot dogs. What's the worst thing a protagonist ever did in a children's movie or show? Tink in Peter Pan is an absolute monster. She tried to get the Lost Boys to murder Wendy. The whole film is full of aberrant morality. I mean, that's relatively on the low end of her atrocities. She sells out Pan and the Lost Boys to the pirates because of her hatred and jealousy. In the book, it's even worse because the pirates aren't buffoons, but highly competent and malicious. Smee isn't as much of a lovable idiot in the original. He's a sadistic torturer whose sword is called Johnny Corkscrew because he wiggles it in the wound after shanking someone. He's described as a genial man who's not as severe as the other pirates to the kids, but he's also described as one who would stab with no offense. Don't forget Peter Pan was a monster too. He'd teach kids how to fly, but never how to land, and they'd just fly until they starved to death. Lab rats. The dad/inventor kept the kids in cages, and it wasn't until he married and got a stepson that they got rescued. Then everyone was, oh well, good times. Honestly, a lot of Disney shows and other kids' shows have creepy undertones like this. This won't make much sense to anyone who's never watched the show, but I'll never forget an episode of Wizards of Waverly Place where Alex makes a new friend that turns out to be part of this underground uprising against the unfair rules on who gets to have powers. She seemingly joins her, only to find out she was actually tricking her so she could turn her into the authorities. They act like this was a huge, brave, and heroic thing she did, and that the people fighting against unfairness were those evil people who deserved to be punished. Basically, the message was that you should never question authority, and those who try to stand against unjust laws should be turned in. It really creeped me out. Oh, it turns out I misremembered that last part. It's actually worse than that. She freezes her to give her powers to her brother, and then Alex's little brother Max knocks her over and shatters her as the laugh track plays, and they act like it's no big deal. They literally kill her and shrug it off. Man, the people who made that show are messed up, especially making it a kids' show. Princess Poppy in the Trolls movie. The whole problem and everyone nearly dying was all because she couldn't accept and let someone be happy not singing and dancing. I think they handled her better in the second film when Branch outright tells her she's not listening to anyone and making things worse. The Fat Controller in Thomas the Tank Engine bricking up Henry the Green Train. All Henry wanted was a coat of waterproof paint or a break from the work till the rain stopped. Nope, brick up the tunnel and take up the tracks. Frick you, engine, you work for me. Is the Fat Controller really the good guy? The trains are enslaved and taken to the junker's yard if not really useful. Dude is worse than that Grandpa Joe. Ha ha ha, laughed the Fat Controller. You are wrong. There are a lot of downright concerning implications of the Thomas verse. These talking, thinking, feeling creatures are often subjected to downright dangerous work conditions and punished terribly if they voice dissent. That show haunted the young narrator once upon a time. Agent Black from Johnny Test casually and nonchalantly says, "I blew up Malaysia." Also, what I find funny, blowing up Malaysia only gets them down to the level of police officer. Here's my entry to help get conversation going. In the 2005 Disney movie Chicken Little, the school bully, Foxy Loxy, gets teleported by aliens and suffers brain damage resulting in a massive personality change. When the aliens move to return her to normal, Runt of the Litter stops them, saying she was now perfect. It's then implied the two become romantically involved. Let's not forget Buck Cluck being a really crap father to Chicken Little. Frick it, this whole movie just sucks. I don't think it would be remiss to say, frick Buck Cluck. Sportacus and Stephanie treating Robbie Rotten badly, all because he didn't want to be active. Let him live in Lazy Town in peace. Those two came to a place literally called Lazy Town and tried to force everyone to be more active and stuff. If anything, Robbie Rotten should have been the hero for trying to maintain how the town should be. You speak the truth. If you think about it, Robbie Rotten is far more heroic. Sportacus thinks that being active is the key to happiness and well-being. As such, he tries to convince the kids to be more active, which in turn requires him to be active. Okay, sure. Now, Robbie Rotten thinks that the key to happiness and well-being is to be inactive. As such, he tries to convince the kids to be less active, which in turn requires him to be active. Now, this is Robbie making his day worse to improve someone else's day. Ignoring the question of which of them is correct in their worldview, it's obvious that Robbie Rotten is substantially more selfless. The episodes often show Robbie bothered, usually not by the noise the children are making, but by the idea that they are being active. He goes through huge amounts of work and planning to correct this, often making elaborate games for kids in the process. Finally, let's examine the basic claim that Sportacus makes that the children would be happier and healthier if they subscribed to his lifestyle. They do seem to enjoy his sports, though Ziggy often has his complaints. However, compare this to the joy the children had in Robbie Rotten's "You're a Pirate" game, which involved nothing but props, imagination, and singing. Everyone loved it. You might think then that at least Sportacus is correct that the children would be healthier if they followed his advice, but once again I say that Robbie is right. If you trap Sportacus in a cage, he starts to pass out in mere minutes from fruit withdrawal. He might be able to outrun Robbie, sure, but it isn't like Robbie isn't capable enough to build a treehouse, ships, and whatnot. The Cat in the Hat nearly pummeled a young child's skull with a baseball bat. That movie is hilarious and yet so screwed up. He legit cuts his tail off and swears in front of children. In High School Musical, when everyone manipulates Troy into saying he doesn't care about Gabriella at all while recording the whole thing so that she sees it. God, if I was Troy and learned about that, I'd have quit the basketball team. If my friends couldn't stand by me and sold me out like that, there's no reason to be with them. Same with Gabriella and her science friends. Of course, they didn't manipulate her into saying things she'd regret and film it, but they still thought her potentially being distracted from their competition was enough of a reason to mess up her relationship. It's been a while since I've seen it, I'm sorry if I made mistakes. In the Rapunzel TV series, there's a controversial episode in which Rapunzel, after having an argument with Eugene in which she disagrees with his advice, accidentally goes back in time to a point when Eugene was a thieving teen. During this episode, she appears as one of the Stabbington brothers and ends up changing Eugene's views in the future to match hers by the end of the show. Eugene has no idea this has even happened. It's pretty controversial because while Rapunzel didn't mean to do it, she sort of forced a core personality change in him, and the show never really addressed the argument because Eugene is just like, I don't know why we were arguing before because I agree, and the end of the episode. The following story is from a series that I've never seen, nor probably ever will see, but it definitely has some mind-bogglingly interesting implications from the way the author describes it. In the 4th season of Winx Club, the main characters get a new power-up, the Believix, and it's a mess. They each get a new power to use at their own discretion. Here's a quick description of what these powers let them do. 1. The Strength of Life. Bloom. It lets her make people believe in magic and help them overcome their weaknesses. She decides what qualifies as a weakness. She overrides a person's free will to make them believe in magic, which just so happens to make the girls stronger and rewrite their personality if she doesn't like it. Dawn of Light. Stella. It makes her people more cooperative and accepting. Basically, she overrides another person's free will, so they do what she says. Breath of the World. Flora. It lets her make people show more appreciation for nature. Nice on paper, but it basically makes people ignore potentially more important tasks or forego certain technologies in favor of nature. Bright Heart. Musa. This is actually the most normal because aside from the usual of making people believe in magic, its only other effect is to convince people that they can change. Gem of Mind. Techna. To quote the official description of this ability, she can use it to make people think correctly. I think that's enough info. She decides how people should think and magically imposes that way of thinking onto them. The Spirit of Courage, Aisha. This is also very basic, the same as the first one with the added bonus of making people braver, but one use in particular rubbed me the wrong way. In one scene, she made a girl walk through a wall of fire to escape the burning building. The girl with water magic whose best friend is on the way to becoming an insufferable Mary Sue, and whose fire magic can extinguish any flame with a snap of her fingers. There was literally no need to endanger that girl like that. They had 2 people on scene who could not only have saved the building, but also all 6 of them could have repaired it with magic. Overall, those girls are a threat to society. They're emotionally unstable, have 0 coping mechanisms for when they get sad, and are basically demigods. Musa once saw her boyfriend with another woman, and she just ran away crying like a kid. She has sound-based powers. She could have easily listened to what they were saying. I put forth that Santa is a total butthole in Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. I can understand the young reindeer making fun of Rudolph's red nose. Kids are mean and will easily make fun of someone for being different. But then Santa walks in. He could have set everyone straight right there. Explained how it's our differences that make everyone special and all that. Nope, he readily agrees with everyone that Rudolph is a lost cause and even tells Donna he should be ashamed of his son's red nose. Da frick? Until he needs him, then all of a sudden he's part of the group and useful and liked. That's some fit in or go fricking die if I ever saw it. Any deviations from the norm will not be tolerated unless it's exploitable. Ho ho ho! Land Before Time when they're sleeping in the footprint and Sarah tries to wake them up gently and quietly. Littlefoot starts being loud and attracts the Sharptooth, causing him to lose the last gift his mother ever gave him, a tree star. Literally every single decision made by Robin Williams in Mrs. Doubtfire. What's interesting is that as a kid, you side with Robin Williams. Rewatching it as an adult, the guy was seriously dysfunctional, and his wife was absolutely right to divorce his butt. Also, you realize that Pierce Brosnan's character wasn't the villain you thought he was when you were a kid. He was a legitimately nice, solid guy, dating a woman with 3 kids, going through a contentious divorce. He was a saint, but ended up almost choking to death. Batman shutting down a machine that was turning Matt Hagen, aka Clayface, back into a human because he was using an experimental thing stolen from his company. I never hated Batman more than that moment because the animated series Clayface is the most tragic fricking creature of a man there ever was. Ron Perlman always made me cry when he had that first moment where he says, "I'm not even a man." I cry every time. In the episode, he's falling apart and dying. Then when he's there on the precipice of becoming human again, he can feel it. Batman tosses a batarang and cuts off the flow of the chemical. Fricking hated him for that. Yes, thank you. I hated that episode as a kid. Clayface had the chance to get his life back, but Batman stops it because he stole something? It felt so unfair. Fair to say that The Dark Knight has often done some pretty controversial things in his many iterations, but I'm not sure that anyone can look at his solution and agree it was the morally right thing to do by any means here. Perhaps some of you would disagree. Let me know. Sounds like what happened to Deadshot in that movie. Confronted him when he's out with his child for Christmas shopping, if I recall correctly. Carly from iCarly was a butthead. Remember that episode where she's attracted to the guy because he stole his brother's motorcycle? Then she dumps him because he was not manly enough because he collects plushies. Schneider's humor was so mean-spirited overall. Remember the one where Freddy says he didn't like Fred, and Fred made the whole video about quitting the internet forever, and Freddy was getting hate mail including a phone call from his aunt where she told him she hoped he fricking died? Then at the end they met Fred, and he tells him the whole thing was just made-up drama to bring attention to iCarly and his own channel, and he didn't even bother to fricking tell them first. Pretty much everyone in that show was a crap bag. The third Hokage really had Naruto living by himself. Poor, begging the ramen man to feed him. All this after promising his dying parents that he would take care of him. He was basically the ruler of the village and let the kid live in poverty for no reason. Goku giving Perfect Cell a damn senzu bean right before his emotional teenage son fought him to the death, over the fate of the Earth. A couple of people have said this, can you elaborate? Okay, so Perfect Cell is essentially a combination of all the strongest fighters on Earth. Fighters who have killed planet-destroying monsters, or a being who killed them all in an alternate timeline. Goku, in some sort of bizarre test, fought Cell and won, but didn't kill him, instead he healed him, which brought him to beyond his full strength thanks to alien biology, and made his son fight him for the fate of the planet, just to see if Earth will be okay if Goku dies. This led to his own death, giving his son PTSD, causes the end of the world in the next arc, thanks to Rival becoming evil thanks to a lack of a sparring partner whose power releases an intergalactic demon who destroys Earth. Dragon Ball is weird, I know, and makes both of his sons fatherless for the greater half of their childhood. The parents and parent trap. Let's separate our twins, take one each, and never tell our respective child that she has a sister. What the frick? Mr. Krabs drove his rival Plankton to take his own life by stalking and harassing him in a Pearl costume in the one-course meal episode of SpongeBob SquarePants. What about when SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs actively attempted to cover up what they thought was a murder? Also, didn't Bubble Buddy basically just watch a guy drown? There was some dark crap in SpongeBob. Fun fact, one of the recent SpongeBob episodes legitimately referenced Squidward trying to take his own life. Basically, Squidward and SpongeBob had to deliver a Krabby Patty to a bizarre mind-frickery land. Squidward tried to escape from the place by opening a series of doors until a jump scare of Squidward's face showed up. The UK version removed that part for some reason. Just saw an episode of Teen Titans the other day, and they spent nearly a whole episode trying to escape this witch that had mind-controlled them and was trying to eat them. When they finally trap her back in the cursed pie, it's a weird episode, they leave it outside the door of the teenage supervillain group so that they will get eaten. I can't frame this in any other way than attempted murder. Teen Titans, don't go. Not sure if it counts as a children's movie, but in Man of Steel, Superman grabs one of the Kryptonians and flies him straight into a gas station, causing a huge explosion. The gas station had multiple cars parked at the pumps. In other words, Superman, who later on cries over having to kill the villain intent on destroying his planet, straight up killed at least half a dozen people out of pure negligence and didn't bat an eye. There's a bunch of great videos on YouTube about this, but Superman is portrayed so badly in the DC movies. In the comics, he's such a nice guy. In the movies, he's an emotional robot. He sees an entire building blow up in front of him and just fricks right off. He doesn't even try to help. What the frick? I'm sure the Man of Steel doesn't count as a kids movie as well. I was just desperate to be able to comment on one of the few things that I've actually seen in this collection of stories. Yes, Clark kills a whole bunch of people, and yes, he gives about 1,000th of a frick about it as he does for killing one genocidal Kryptonian general. Hey, remember when in Spider-Man Far From Home, Tony Stark left a high schooler an advanced military drone system with no instructions on how to use it? Like that's a thing that shouldn't exist at all, but much less in the hands of a teenager. Yeah, on the bus in the first hour of the movie, doesn't he accidentally order a hit on one of his classmates? Like it's kinda weird that in Homecoming he didn't let Peter have access to most of the stuff in his suit, but then in Far From Home he's just like, you know what would be a good idea? Letting a teenager have a pair of glasses that could literally order an entire fleet of deadly drones to kill an entire population of people. I mean, at least leave him a manual that he has to read before he has full control over the glasses, surely. As told by Ginger. Fricking Dodie. Rather be popular and wanted than be a good friend to Ginger. I loved As Told by Ginger growing up, and Dodie was the biggest irritant on the show by far. Any little sliver of a chance that she could become popular, she'd drop Ginger and Macy in a heartbeat, only to come crawling back when it blew up in her face. Oh, that one kid, Greg? I don't know, from Diary of a Wimpy Kid. He fricking shuns his best friend for clout, breaks his arm, throws kids in a ditch in the rain, craps on his friend's comic idea, and blames his friend for getting him fired from being a hall monitor. At the beginning of Megamind, when they were just school kids, Metro Man is literally responsible for turning Megamind to villainy by ostracizing and bullying him. It turned out okay in the end, but it's bothersome he never addressed or apologized for his behavior. Willy Wonka literally disfigured 4 kids on his factory tour. Not to mention all the slave labor. Butthole pays Oompa Loompas with cocoa beans. That's definitely below the minimum wage. In the first Harry Potter, Dumbledore gets to the end of the year when they count up all the points to see who was the best house. Gryffindor are dead last and Slytherin in first place, like literally 150 points ahead. Dumbledore announces Slytherin is the winner, but then he's like, "Hold up, I've got a couple of announcements for the final tally. Ron is good at chess, 50 points. Hermione is smart, 50 points. Harry is low-key the bravest guy I know, 100 points. Checks calculations, Gryffindor and Slytherin are tied. And Neville was able to have a direct conversation. 5 points. Gryffindor wins! The little girl who lets out all of the dinosaurs at the end of what I think is the second Jurassic World movie. The dinosaurs are about to be gassed to death or something, and they make a moral decision to let them out, since they have a right to live and survive. So the little girl lets them loose, and almost immediately the dinosaurs are released and kill a bunch of the villains in the movie. We're supposed to cheer, as the audience I guess, that the villains are finally getting their comeuppance, but I mean these dinosaurs aren't sentient or moral like humans. They weren't killing bad people, they were just killing people, and the good guys unleashed human-murdering dinosaurs on the planet. Like, no crap. Within just a few short moments, people died when they let them out of their cages. Harry Potter being left to a known abusive family by a society of wizards has to be high up there. Actually, the whole of Hogwarts is pretty fricked up. They're so irresponsible. They literally teach kids how to basically make Rohypnol. And they sent Harry and his crew into a literal death forest where a powerful unicorn-killing wizard was hiding. Part of why I love/hate Umbridge so much, it's super effective when the lady comes along whose punishments are so fricked up, even by wizard standards. Umbridge is just such a perfect microcosm of petty, official tyranny. We've all met Umbridge in one guise or another, and the hatred people like that stir up in almost everyone is distilled into her character. She's like the platonic form of the parking warden who delights in seeing someone's car towed away. The bureaucrat who barely suppresses a giggle as your dream house has its planning denied. The port official who politely but gleefully informs you that at his say-so you won't be allowed to board the ferry to go on holiday because of a slight paperwork mistake. She's Orwell's proverbial boot stamping on a human face forever. She's the Vogons if someone made a serious take on the concept. She's the personification of the system triumphing over the individual. She's the meat grinder from another brick-in-the-wall video that homogenizes children into a uniform paste. Umbridge absolutely nails that whole archetype, and the fact that she's so memorable is because we've all met her. I dare say Umbridge is Rowling's greatest character, for the sheer hatred she instills in absolutely everyone. The Jedi taking children from their family and encouraging emotional repression. I just started watching Clone Wars recently, having missed it during the actual run. So far, I've seen at least 1 or 2 fake surrenders by the Jedi, and I was like, that's an actual war crime. You can't just do that. I mean, that's just a surefire way to make sure your enemy doesn't accept surrenders anymore and just murders you. Not just emotional repression as well. Many children are taken from distinct species, cultures, and traditions. They indoctrinate them into a cult-like order of mystics, teach them feelings are wrong, familial bonds are wrong, and fraternal bonds are wrong, carnal pleasures and vices are wrong, and suggest that abstinence is important. Preach peace and harmony, and teach them how to use a laser sword and mystic powers to enforce their peaceful ways and the ideals of the Senate. Jingle All the Way is a story about a dad who punches and lies to everyone he meets over the course of a day, only to steal a toy for his kid. As much as I loved the show as a kid and still like it now, I'm a lot older and more cynical. And I can't get over the plain and simple truth that SpongeBob is unforgivably annoying when you really think about it. He's an excellent cook and a good and supportive friend and generally a good soul, but overall, Yeah, I'm quite sympathetic to the living hell Squidward lives in on some days. The older I get, the more I understand Squidward. You either die a SpongeBob or you live long enough to see yourself become a Squidward. What is a time your pet has genuinely surprised you? My cat once pounced on a poisonous snake that was moving towards my son. He pinned it down until one of us got to him and then let the snake go. Kitty got some extra nice tuna fish that night. As some people have commented, snakes are venomous, not poisonous. Whatever. Gary doesn't care, he just saw something he could pounce on. I was doing some electrical work in an empty 2-story industrial building. I brought my dog along because she likes running around, exploring, and chasing mice. Every so often she'd take a break and come visit me working. I only had one electrical part left, a nut-like wire tensioner, and I showed it to my dog randomly and said, "Go get it." The pile of these parts was downstairs in a 20 to 30 room building on a pile of gear. My dog, who is crappy at even playing fetch, shows up 5 minutes later having identified the part I asked her for and bought me a new one. Now, at dinner parties, I always try to find 2 of the same objects and hide them somewhere in the house, and she always amazes guests by showing up with what I asked her. I've hired people who I send for a wrench and 2 hours later they return with pliers. Does your dog have a criminal record? And if not, does he have an updated resume? My favorite cat, now passed, had many strange habits. He played with water in the sink, jumped in the shower when you were taking too long, jumped and left paw prints on the top of our walls, etc. But the one time he truly surprised me was nearly 16 years ago. I walked into my bedroom and found my wife crying and holding the cat. I asked her what was wrong and she started to explain. I was tired and decided to take a nap. Butterscotch jumped up, curled up with me, and then started kneading my stomach. I didn't understand what she was getting at and told her so. She said that the last time he did that was when she was pregnant with our first daughter 5 years earlier, and he never did it since. She was convinced that he was trying to tell her that she was pregnant again, and she was crying because she was so happy. She had even made an appointment to get a pregnancy check. Turns out, 4 weeks pregnant. I miss that cat. He made it to over 20 years. Cats, man. They can be really nasty little mean buttholes, but there are several in this collection of stories that exemplify what the best of them can be like. Related, the whole recording session is making me want to go and buy a whole bunch of pets. I posted this story a few months ago, but it's pretty typical of the interactions between my dog, a Corgi-Sheltie mix, and me. After 8 years of things like this, there's very little that surprises me with him. A while back, I was playing fetch with him out at the lake. He was starting to get bored, so after getting the ball one time, he carried it with him behind a tree, dropped it, and then trotted back to me as if there had been no ball in the first place. I wanted to see what he'd do next, so I got the ball and threw it again. This time, he ran and got it, then proceeded to jump in the lake, swim out 20 to 30 feet, drop the ball in the water, and swim back. Needless to say, this ended our game of fetch. We had a Jack Russell who would just play reverse fetch. My daughter had really proudly just taught him to fetch when he took the ball, trotted over to the patio railing, we live on the 3rd floor apartment, and dropped it over the side. I went down to go get it, gave it back to him, and he went right back out and dropped it over the edge again. I live next to a mental health facility. I never really bought the idea that dogs could sense things in people, but when I got my Weimaraner and took him for walks around the hospital grounds, he would act completely different when someone with a mental illness approached us versus a staff member. Even if they were 100 feet away, he would stop playing and stand by my side if they were a patient. Weird. I had severe depression problems as a teen, and some days I wouldn't get out of bed. My lab at the time would come up, stick his nose under my arm, flip it up so it lands on him, or would bring his toy and drop it into my lap. The dog knew when I wasn't doing well, and did everything he could to make me active. We used to have a kitty that would go to work with my dad. He worked in a grain terminal where farmers would bring in their grain and they would put it onto train cars and send it out to wherever, mills, etc. While Dad was working, the kitty would be running around the place chasing mice or playing with the farmers when they came in. The phone rang off the hook around there. Almost every few minutes the phone would ring and someone would answer it. If the secretary was out, one of the other guys would have to come in and answer it. I was just a young lad back then, but one day the phone was ringing and nobody was coming to answer it. The cat jumps onto the desk, flips the receiver off the base station so it's upside down, speaker and mic facing up, and starts meowing into it. I swear the farmer must have been confused as heck. When I asked my dad about it, he said that the kitty will let it ring 4 times before she hops up and answers it. I was blown away. Was a damn good kitty. I had a male cat named Stinky, and all the time I had him, approximately 5 years, he had never slept in the bed with my wife and me. I go on a business trip once, and the first day I'm gone, my wife is laying in bed reading, and Stinky actually jumps on the bed with her, and this is crucial, in the spot where I usually sleep. My wife is surprised, but keeps on reading. Stinky proceeds to roll onto his back and extend his wiener, making sure that the wife sees it. In conclusion, my cat waited for me to go out into town and try to seduce my wife. I think he owes you a dead bird for that one. Hamsters. Mum had a litter, and after they went from little pinkies to little fuzzies, they would take turns in the wheel, 2 to 3 side by side, getting up speed, while the others would line up outside, and one by one grab onto the rim of the wheel, get lifted up and let go, to get flung to the other side of the cage, then get back in line. They also traded up runners from time to time. Some hamster democratic process. Some hamster democratic process. There's an analogy for America somewhere in here. Hamsters are funny little weirdos as is, and the prospect of a flying hamster circus only makes them seem cuter. Bless. We have a cat that never played with toys. She would watch the other cats play and sometimes try to do it herself, but couldn't wrap her mind around bat the ball and chase it. She was pretty dumb in general. If you put a clear glass on the floor with milk in it, she would swat at the sides while the other cats would reach their paws in the top and get the milk. So I got a laser pointer and was playing with the other cats. After a while, the dumb cat showed up and I thought that maybe she would have fun with the red dot since she didn't understand other toys. I zipped the dot around the floor. She looked at it, followed it with her eyes, then walked to my feet, reached up and put her paw over the end of the pointer, blocking the laser. I have no idea if she understood or if it was a coincidence, but it really surprised me. You have a cat nerd. Doesn't really get sports or bars, but great with high-energy physics problems. Maybe your cat was just really smart instead of really dumb. Sees ball, doesn't understand why hitting a ball over and over is fun. Sees laser dot, goes to source and stops it. Sees milk glass, tries to spill it over rather than drink it little by little. Mr. Energy Flow might be onto something here. Oh, my cat does the same thing. He'll first put his head in the glass, and if he can't get any water, he'll just knock it over. A glass is his first priority. He will skip his full bowl, walk right by it, to get on the computer desk and drink my near-empty water glass. After the third keyboard got destroyed, I replaced his bowl with a glass. Apparently that's all he wanted. One of my cats kept meowing. I checked her food bowl, water bowl, litter box, and general health, and nothing seemed out of the ordinary. I gave her plenty of attention and playtime and went back to working on some homework. She continued meowing. Finally, I threw my arms up and to the side in frustration and said, "What do you want?" She looked me dead in the eye, raised her paws in the exact same exasperated way I had my arms raised. She was literally standing upright on 2 legs, holding out her paws like I had my arms, and made her best attempt to copy my speech by saying, "Meow," before scuttling away. I was speechless and stunned for a good minute and relatively freaked out. I'd never had a cat mimic my behavior before. She's never done it again, despite my attempts to encourage it. My cat Dusty has a small cat door to go outside in the summer. Ducks regularly come into my yard and I feed them bread sometimes. Well, Dusty one night grabs the loaf of bread off the counter, takes it out of the cat door, then hides the bread in the bushes. He takes a piece of bread and puts it in an open area and waits in nearby bushes. He was trying to bait ducks with bread. Frickin' genius cat. I had to leave my dog alone for a couple of hours in the morning and the night before he had eaten something that didn't quite agree with his stomach. When I came back, he didn't greet me like he usually does, so I was suspicious. He couldn't get out of the house to poop, so he had to poop in the middle of the living room. I didn't yell at him, no point now, plus he knew it was wrong and he just couldn't hold it in. He hasn't done this since he was a pup 3 years ago. Well, I go to investigate and see that there's been a disturbance in the bathroom. The rug in front of the toilet was all thrown around and the toilet seat had scratches on it. I think my dog, after the many times he had seen me poop with the door open, decided that he needed to go there but didn't know how to use it, so he scratched the seat while trying and threw the rug around in anger of not being able to do it. Then he pooped on the carpet as a last resort. I had a lovable golden retriever whose name was Duncan. Like many dogs, he had a supreme sense of emotions of my family members, comforting us when we were sad, jumping around with us when we were excited. He really sensed how we felt and adapted to the situation, but lots of dogs do that, so that's not the surprising part. He had a sensitive stomach and often threw up despite our best efforts to feed him carefully and beneficially. My mom never scolded him for throwing up in the house, but he still felt extremely guilty whenever it happened. One day, he slowly came up next to me as I was doing homework. Glancing at him, I saw he had his mouth jammed shut and refused to open it for me. When I got out of my chair, he politely led me to the back door, signaling that he had to go outside. I quickly let him out, and after walking all the way across our deck and down the steps into the grass, he let loose the largest amount of vomit I've ever seen. He spent a solid 30 seconds emptying the contents of his stomach into a neat pile on our yard. Conclusion: after patiently storing vomit in his mouth for at least a full minute, my faithful dog politely led me outside, across our deck and into our yard, where he emptied all of his stomach contents in a neat pile so that my mom wouldn't have to clean up after him. It's been said many times by many people, but we don't deserve doggos. No other animal will put themselves through that amount of discomfort just to make us happy. When I was a kid, I had a cat that was a little odd. One day, my mother caught two teenage boys tormenting my cat along an alley that went along outside our house. She thought they were trying to cut the cat's tail off with a craft knife, so ran and kicked one of the boys away. My cat went to run off, but when it saw that the boy with the knife had turned on my mother, it went nuts, launched itself at the boy's face, and tore it to bits in a frenzy. Never heard of cats doing that kind of thing. I got my cat in college. He was very young when I got him, and I was pretty much the only human he interacted with, so he was very attached to me. He loved to snuggle and purr and was never a biter. Anyway, I happened to have an eating disorder at the time, and I would weigh myself several times a day. The weight would not be what I wanted, and I would get upset. After a few weeks of having the cat, I went to go step on the scale. As I tried to step on it, the cat launched himself across the bed, tackled my calf, and bit down very hard. He never did things like that. After that episode, he proceeded to bite and scratch me whenever I went for the scale. Apparently, his cat logic was, human girl steps on box, gets sad, and cries. I must make sure she never steps on the box. Funny thing is, this actually helped me get treatment for the problem. I was like, crap, even my cat knows I have a big problem here. I should get help. Anyway, today I'm happy and healthy. Thanks to the best cat ever. 6 years ago, one of our two cats died, and my sister insisted that we cremate it and keep it in an urn. As soon as they'd placed the urn into a cabinet we had at home, our other cat sat in front of it making meowing noises that I'd never heard coming from a cat before, for like 20 minutes. I couldn't believe that our cat knew it was her sister and mourned like any other human. It was quite astonishing, really. When I was in high school, my family and I went to the feed store to get some supplies for our lawn and gardens. While there, we saw a brown bunny that someone had dropped off to sell. I begged and begged my dad for this rabbit. He said no. I came home a day or two later, and there is the rabbit sitting in its cage on our coffee table. Apparently my dad broke down and bought him. He was a great rabbit and very unusual in the fact that he thought he was a dog, always running around your feet when you came home. He would sit on the couch with my dad and eat ginger snaps and drink coffee with him. He always knew when you were sick. On the couch, he would jump up and just rest on your chest. We had him for 10 years and he died this past spring. My dad trained guard dogs in Vietnam and I have never seen him cry, not even at his own mother's funeral. But I'll be damned if that rabbit didn't affect my dad in such a way that he cried and said he lost a best friend. I was laying on my couch and wanted to turn the light off, but the switch was on the other side of the room. Within 10 seconds of me thinking that I wanted the light off, I crap you not, my cat comes flying out of nowhere, jumps and flicks the switch off. It was the craziest freaking thing, and to this day I wish someone had witnessed that with me. It was amazing. My cat is amazing. You know how outdoor cats will sometimes bring you presents like dead birds and mice? Well, our outdoor kitty brought us a ham and cheese sandwich. I have no idea where he found it. We had a golden retriever that thrived on escaping. Whenever the door was even a bit ajar, he'd take off and have day-long excursions, only to come back hours later with a huge grin on his face, and usually filthy from adventuring in the surrounding creeks and woodlands. If you ran after him, he'd troll the crap out of you and play chase games for up to an hour before letting you put the leash back on. If you happened to find him while you were driving, he'd readily jump in the car with you. No hassle. One morning as my parents were getting ready for work, the dog bolted. They both had meetings to get to and would only be gone for a few hours, and we knew he'd be back in the afternoon, so they left. When we came back, we circled the neighborhood looking for him and found him taking center point in the street with a pack of 5 other neighborhood dogs traipsing after him. Fricker had formed a gang and he was the gosh darned alpha. We pull up and scream for him to get in the car, which he readily does with a huge grin on his face as he slobbers and licks everyone. Business clothes be damned. Then, we take the long way around the neighborhood to get back to our house. By the time we do, all 5 of the dogs we just saw with him were waiting for him obediently in our driveway. We shooed them away. Later we found out from the neighbors that our dog had run from yard to yard and freed the fenced-in dogs by nosing up the latches. Once this started, other neighbors had been warning each other of the mass exodus by telephone, but our dog was too fast. People then had to replace the latches with locks since our dog had taught the others how to jailbreak. The Great Dog Escape may go down as one of my favorite stories in this thread, and the fact that his liberated brethren gathered outside his house to protest his imprisonment is the cherry on the cake. I had a house rabbit named Ceres that my parents rescued. She was going to be put down because her owners got evicted. She loved reggae and bassy music, and she used to lie still and purr along to it. She lived in my room for 6 months, and whenever I came home from school, she'd jump up and sit on my feet. She used to have these little wild fits and run around and do cartwheels. Then she died when my family was away on holiday, and the kennel kept her in the freezer. I have a big fat cat named Pete. The day my son came home from hospital, Pete decided that he was in charge of the baby. He would lay with him for hours, and as soon as the baby would start to stir, Pete would immediately come and find us. Pete would soothe, clean, and be the best babysitter in the world. 5 years later, our cat still follows my son everywhere he goes. One more about Pete. My husband deployed for 15 months. The second he walked in the door, Pete ran like a gosh darn tiger and jumped straight for him. He refused to leave my hubby's lap for the next 8 hours. In conclusion, my cat likes boys more than girls. I'd been overly affectionate with my guinea pig for months, but he bitterly ignored me. Recently, I decided to ignore him, seeing as my loving nature doesn't agree with him. Now the little butthole won't leave me alone, licks my face, my toes, popcorning, weird jump thing guinea pigs do when they're ecstatic, for joy when he sees me. God, he is such a butthole. Oh man, when my rats popcorn, it is so cute. It happens when they're playing, or if I give them something really tasty, like if I hand them a piece of chocolate. They cautiously take it with their mouth, then adjust the position of the food in their mouth to carry it easier, then bounce under the furniture to go and eat it. Their eyes get wider when they eat something tasty like, om nom nom, oh wait, oh god, oh this is delicious. And they will also play a game with me, where they hop up on my back and walk around my hands and knees and stop by different furniture in the room. They will then hop off me onto the bed, desk, or whatever, sniff around, and then hop back on my shoulder to go somewhere else. This repeats several times before they get bored. My dog is always the star at the dog beaches. He will literally get every dog there playing in one big group. The other people now know him as the party starter. One day, there was this really old, giant wolfhound of some kind, just a generally huge, shaggy dog, Mutt. My dog runs over and the owner warned me that her dog was really old and grumpy, so I tried to keep my little party animal away from the big dog. Well, my dog won't give up and keeps going over and trying to wrestle with this gigantic old dog, and eventually the old guy breaks down and started playing with my dog. I'm all laughing because this huge dog is literally putting my whole tiny dog in his mouth, and they're generally just wrestling away and having the best time. And I look up and the other dog's owner is crying. "What's wrong?" I ask. "My dog has cancer and is getting put down shortly, and this is the happiest I've seen her in months." While all the other dogs were staying away from the big grump, my dog just rolls up to give this old-timer one last tussle in the sand. It was truthfully one of the most amazing moments I've ever been a part of. It's something so simple, but I went outside with my girlfriend and saw one of my cats across the street that was excited to see us. He decided to make his way over to us, and since we lived on a big and busy street, I nervously watched as he approached the curb, but to my amazement, he turned his head to the left, then checked to his right, and happily pranced across the street. That little butthole just looked both ways before crossing. It was small, but it surprised me. My yellow lab would get offended at you if you talked crap about him or scolded him unjustly. Then you had to apologize to him to get him to quit sulking. As in, you actually had to go up to him and say, "I'm sorry, Tucker," and pet him, or he would refuse to look at you. My dad would never apologize to the dog, so the dog would stay mad at him for days. It was hilarious. Once when I was a kid, I was sitting on my bed reading a book. My cat was in the room and I had the door closed. The cat decided she wanted to get out of the room and started standing by the door and meowing to get my attention. I wanted to finish the chapter of the book off, so I just ignored her. She decided that wasn't good enough, so she jumped on the dresser right next to the door and immediately pushed a cup full of spare change off the dresser. She then stood stock still and stared at me. When I didn't get up and let her out, she pushed my watch off the dresser and stared at me again. She was basically saying to me, "I know this bothers you, and I'm going to keep knocking your crap on the ground until you open the door." My dog ejected a Celine Dion CD from the player whenever the fourth track came on. For the life of me, I can't remember the song, but when we discovered this, we had to see if it was an accident. for science. And by the third try, she gave us this look like we were torturing her. And it was Celine, so probably. My first dog was a psychotic Jack Russell by the name of Foxy. Foxy hated being indoors and would rather drag his bed to our garden to sit in the lawn, surrounded by 6-foot fences. One day, a cat wandered along the top of the fence and the dog saw it. God only knows how, but he jumped to the top of the fence and headbutted the cat off it. That dog was a nutter. People who've had a creepy feeling about someone come true, what happened? Not me, but my cousin. She was on an overnight Greyhound bus, and a man got on and many of the seats were full. He walked towards the open seat next to her and looked as if he was going to sit there, and my cousin says, "You can't sit here." Usually a very open and friendly person, she kind of thought to herself, "Wow, I really came off as a B-word there." But she had a bad feeling about him. So the man finds another seat and my cousin falls asleep. A little while later, she wakes up to the bus pulled over to the side of the road and the police cars outside. The police came onto the bus and arrested the man who wanted to sit with my cousin. He had found another woman to sit with and had attempted the unspeakable act on her. How strange. I'm pretty sure that get the frick away from that person is a basic survival instinct. It's whether or not you're listening to it or not. Thank God your cousin did and is okay. My ex-boyfriend's dad had always given me the creeps. Nothing in particular, just a really bad vibe. Broke up with that ex about 8 years ago. I saw in the paper recently his dad got arrested for the unspeakable act. The girl told her mum when she was 13. She had been one of his victims since she was 5. Fricking horrifying. Back when I was in high school, some new kid joined. Only really interacted with him on the football field, but he really rubbed me the wrong way. I'm not a small guy, I'm big enough to fend for myself, so while he creeped me out, I wasn't really scared of him. I should have been, but ego gets in the way when you're a teenager. All of a sudden, he tries to injure me in discreet ways while playing football, like stamping on my ankle, tripping me up while none of us had the ball, nobody was looking, etc. After a couple more incidents, he stepped it up, a lot. He ended up stabbing me in the face while I was reading a book. We don't know if he meant to murder me or seriously maim me, but he punched me 3 times with a sharpened key in his fists. 2 of the blows got deflected by my glasses, which left a giant mark on the lenses and where my temple was. Sometimes you feel off about someone, but they don't look like they can really threaten you too much, but in reality, they can and they will. In college, I worked at a bar and they brought in this new bouncer. From the second I met him, I immediately felt like there was something seriously wrong with him. His smile and eye contact were too intense. I told a coworker that the guy gave me the creeps and she told me she thought he was cute and nice, and didn't get where I was coming from. A quick Google search pulled up his mugshot and articles about how he was watching his college roommate's dog one weekend and horribly attacked and maimed it. He burnt this poor dog and poured bleach on her. She thankfully survived and he was arrested. The article talked about how he was laughing at the police arresting him, saying he knows he won't get in any trouble. He was fired and told to never come back once management found out. Oof. Probably doubly saved in that he got fired before he abused his power. Bouncers have a lot of sway around the intoxicated clientele they serve, and it could have got really ugly. Not me, but my mum. My sister was going to visit her friend out of state, so her friend's friend offered to drive her there. He drove a few hours to get to our house and was noticeably tired when we arrived, so my sister suggested he just sleep on the couch, and they'll go in the morning. The entire night, my mum's going in and out of our rooms saying that there's something off about the guy, that she really doesn't like him but can't figure out why. She actually quietly went out the side door and wrote down his license plate at one point. The next morning, my sister's in his car for maybe 30 minutes before she feels sick and asks him to just take her home, which he does, much to my mother's delight. About 6 months later, my mum's looking at her newsfeed when she sees a familiar face and calls my sister and I over and yells, "I told you something was off about him!" Turns out that about a year earlier he had murdered his ex-girlfriend and that his friend, who helped him bury her body, finally decided to tell the cops not because he developed a conscience, but because he was mad at him for stealing his toaster. In conclusion, my mum thought houseguest was creepy. Houseguest turns out to be a murderous toaster thief. Well, to be fair, I wouldn't want to implicate myself as an accessory after the fact, but steal my kitchen appliances and it's game on. Pro-life tip: never steal a toaster from the guy who helped you bury your murder victim's body. There was a guy interested in dating my mum years ago. She wasn't interested, something seemed off. He was also interested in dating 2 of her other friends. All 3 had young daughters. Shortly after this, we moved away, and he started dating one of the friends. They stayed with us at a weekend music festival, and the girl wanted to stay in the trailer that our family had rented, so we let her. I'll always be grateful we did, because it kept her away from that creep. We found out he was abusing her shortly before we'd heard that he'd died in a car accident. Good riddance. Guys like that are the main reason I have no interest in dating right now. My daughter is 11, and I'm okay with being single for a few more years. I prefer that to unknowingly bringing a monster into the house. Honestly, having 2 stepdads who were awful to me, I thank you. I'm not a single mother, but I wish mine would have been okay with just the 2 of us for a while, because I always felt like she needed a man around and chose 2 scumbags, one who she knew since she was 16. My brother is 9, and I tell her that if she wants to get married again, I can take my brother to live with me, and I will be single. Met this guy on a night out. He was new to the area and friends with my friend's brother. He came across as nice and friendly, but then he started being a bit strange, like he kept rubbing my back and touching my legs. We all went back to my friend's house and I was pretty drunk, but this guy kept trying to get me to leave with him without seeing anyone. I told everyone something was weird about him. Turns out he'd been charged with doing the unspeakable act against a 10-year-old, and that's why he'd left his previous city. He'd crept on a 13-year-old a few weeks before he met me, and the police found out he was in possession of a lot of adult material containing children. My mum and I were in a cafe and she had her handbag down by her feet. This couple comes in and sits at the table behind us, and he attracted my attention because he kept poking his girlfriend, telling her how to sit, and just, the hairs on my neck went up. I hate that controlling bullcrap. So he's in my periphery, and this guy won't sit still when my mum says, "Hey, where's my bag?" She finds it a second later, moved and open. She reached in to get her purse and said, "My card is gone." So the couple behind had stood and were walking at speed toward the door. I didn't even hesitate. "Stop that man!" Because I figured I could apologize later if I was wrong. One of the waitresses was right by the door and she followed him out the door, at which point the guy dropped my mum's card, mumbled something about having found it, and then ran for it. I guess if he hadn't been such a butt to his girlfriend, I probably wouldn't have noticed. He was a friend of mine, nicest guy you could ever meet. He would go out of his way to do things for people. Something about him always gave me the slightest weird feeling though. We messaged at least once a day, and then all of a sudden, I didn't hear from him for 2 weeks. Turns out he was busted in a Craigslist sting for soliciting a minor for more adult acts. Hey, I don't know if anyone will see this, but around middle school I started getting creeped out by my father. He wouldn't even do anything you could point to and say, "That, right there, that's it." But you just got the feeling he was like a spider, watching and waiting, something lurking and dangerous. He began running a group called Scam the Scammers, where they'd make scammers do ridiculous things. It was all in good fun, because they deserved it. Humiliating, sometimes painful things. Teachers wouldn't call home to discuss anything we did, positive or negative. There were notes in my file to only discuss things with my mother, no matter what. He started becoming obsessed with conspiracy theories. Obama was a Kenyan Muslim, my mother was cheating on him with a woman and 3 men, all sorts of things. You got the feeling something was wearing my father as a skin suit. That's the best way I can describe it. Turns out he has an inoperable brain tumor. He's permanently changed. My father is alive, but he's no longer my dad. Oof. I mean, I'm all for some lightweight scammer scamming if it doesn't hurt people, but yeah, this case it was just the act of a deeply unwell man. This is tragic. Went to school with this guy since about 4th grade. He was a bully and made sure I knew that I wasn't liked, as he used an old doll and named it after me and beat it up with his friends. He always had a weird, creepy vibe, which got worse in high school. He and his friends were actually a lot nicer to me in high school, but I stayed away as much as I could as he made me uncomfortable. About a year after we graduated, he was arrested for following an underage girl and for grabbing her near her school when she was on lunch break. His friends have since cut off contact. Not sure what's happened to him, but he always creeped me out. When I was trying to get my mental health back on track, I went to see this psychiatrist who just gave me a super creepy vibe the minute I saw him, but was such a good psychiatrist I decided to ignore it. My gut feeling was correct when about 4 to 5 months into seeing him, he was arrested for having 10,000 plus unsolicited photos of patients' feet or them sitting on his couch that I've sat on. It sucks opening up to someone so much and having something like this happen, especially in his line of work. I had a doctor do the same. Different specialty, different kinds of pics. I'm currently awaiting trial. I know how you feel. It's so much more heinous to use a position of trust to gain access to people just to take advantage of them. Got a bad vibe from the dad across the street when I was a kid. Military guy who always seemed to be on a power trip. His oldest son and I went to the same school and would occasionally carpool. One day it was his dad's turn to drive us. His son stayed home sick, but he offered to drive me all the same. Thankfully, it wasn't a long ride, but the entire time he talked about his beat-up Camaro. Definitely creeped me out. Fast forward a couple of years, his wife threw him out one morning. Turns out he'd been beating the crap out of her for a while. One morning, while hitting her again, he stepped on their 1-year-old baby who was crawling on the floor and broke the kid's arm. Never saw him again after that. It's like my worst nightmare to step on a baby or even a cat or dog. Or close a door by accident on a cat sneaking through behind you like they do. I was just thinking yesterday that stuff like this must happen fairly often even from good people that just make one wrong step. You could easily kill a kid, cat, or dog by slipping and falling wrong on them. The world is too dangerous. Time to go back to bed. I worked in fast food restaurants from 14 to 16. The lovely old couple sold it to a younger couple and I got the creeps around the husband from day one. Tried to ignore it, just got on with work, but the first time we were working just the two of us, he followed me into a walk-in freezer and grabbed me. I learned to pay attention to my radar after that. There was this guy that one of my friends at church was dating at the time. I really just felt something dark when I was around him. They eventually married but divorced later on. It turns out that feeling was because this guy is a legit serial killer. Initially, he confessed to I think 3 murders. The police now believe he's responsible for at least 10 within 200 miles of our small town. There was a kid who always weirded me out in school. Nothing major, but he looked at girls too long, and never when they looked at him. When I was in 8th grade, he told my girlfriend that he wondered what she tasted like and wanted to touch her skin. I threatened him if he didn't leave her be. I saw his name on an indecent offender registry last year, when I was helping my mum search for property details. Guy in high school always gave me the creeps, but I could never figure out why. 6 months later, they find a rifle in his locker at school, and that he'd called in bomb threats. This was before any of the school shootings happened in the US, so at the time I didn't really think that much of it. Now it totally freaks me out. I just looked him up and there's an entire Reddit thread about him. He's now a white supremacist and a possible murderer. A dude couch surfing at my son's apartment had a very twitchy vibe like an addict hurting for a fix. I asked my son, "Oh no, he hates substances. He just has like arthritis or something." He borrowed my son's car, got his fix, crashed the car. Said he got carjacked. We reported the car stolen. 2 days later, he OD'd in my son's apartment. My son found him and the EMS guys saved him. My son realized he had issues and started looking for Medicaid rehab space. Dude OD'd again on the couch. EMS saved him again. Narcan is magic. We went to the hospital, told him he could not come back and to text my son where he wanted his stuff dropped off. We dropped it off at his grandma's house. Well, this fellow was clearly in need of serious help. Wish there was more to say about stories like this, but it's just sad, isn't it? Addiction is an illness. When I was 19, I worked at a local restaurant. I loved working there, but I ended up quitting because of some D-bag that was hired. He was in his mid-30s and gave every girl in the restaurant the absolute creepiest vibes. He was constantly saying inappropriate stuff about his past and was just a butthole to people in general. I hated working with him because he creeped me out and was also just mean. I started trading shifts to get away from him. One day a night shift manager was fired and our boss put creepy guy in a temporary manager position. I immediately went to our boss and told him I was uncomfortable with the idea and explained how creepy he was. My boss leveled with me and said the D-bag had no actual manager power and was just temporary until he found someone else. He was just there to run shifts. My boss arranged it so my schedule never crossed over with the creep. One day a coworker of mine got sick and I was asked to cover her shift. I get there and creep is managing. I thought I could deal with one night, but a friend of mine called the store sobbing. She had tried to call my cell around 100 times, but it was in my purse. She was crying hysterically and told me she'd been a victim of the unspeakable act and didn't know what to do or where to go, but that she was horrified and too scared to leave. I told my friend I'd be right there and told D-bag that I had an emergency and would be leaving. It was a slow night and I wasn't needed anyway, but he freaked out and tried to physically stop me, demanding to know my emergency. I tried to sidestep it, but eventually told him what had happened to my friend. He burst out laughing in my face and told me that was hilarious and not an excuse to leave. I told him to go to hell and shoved past him. He told me I couldn't leave and I said, "Watch me." I went outside and burst into tears and called my boss and told him I quit after explaining what had happened. A few months later, I was working at my new job and a former co-worker came in and said they had some news for me. Apparently 2 police officers showed up at my old workplace and served papers to D-bag. He had been stalking a girl for the last 5 years, and it had started when she was 14 or 15. He had finally committed the unspeakable act against her. In conclusion, creep gets hired at work, laughs about the unspeakable act, I hate him, and I quit. He gets charged with the stalking and unspeakable act against a teenage girl. I always had a weird feeling about my stepdad. He always made me uncomfortable, and I always felt like he was watching me. He would make comments about my body and my wardrobe, causing me to feel insecure and watch what I wore around him. When I told my mum, she would say things like, "He's old-fashioned," or "He's just looking out for you." My mum had gone out to the country to visit family, leaving my stepdad, myself, and my older brother to take care of the house. One night, my brother went to a party and I stayed home because I worked early the next morning, but left my bedroom door open so I could hear my brother come home and make sure he made it safe. Instead, my stepdad decided to crawl under my bed and try to commit the unspeakable act against me. It was one of the scariest moments of my life. I pushed him off and ran to the bathroom. I was so freaked out, I just grabbed my work clothes and went to the car and drove off to a random neighborhood and slept in my car. My mum found out a year later because I told my older brother, but she's never talked to me about it. And she's still with him, too. When I told my brother, we gathered all the money we'd been saving up and moved out a month later. I'm blessed to have a brother who loves me and took me out of a bad place. He's been one of my support systems through all this. As for me, I'm in therapy to deal with my trauma and I feel like I'm getting better. A year ago, I wouldn't have been able to type all of this out. I worked for a call center a few years ago and there was a guy that sat at the desk across from me. He was about 40 to 50 and was not married. I'm young enough to be his daughter. He would do anything to talk to me. Come by my desk, run into me in the break room, get in the elevator with me. It was excessive but never threatening at first. He started to say inappropriate things about my outfits. I never wore anything overly provocative, but I figured he was just an awkward dude that did not know how to flirt. I just brushed him off time and time again, but something was definitely off about him. At one point, the secretary came up to me and asked if he was bothering me, and I told her what had been happening. Turns out he did this with only blonde women at the office. He was notorious for creeping them out. It started small, but then he would slowly transition into propositioning them for adult fun times and offering to pay for it. Knowing this, I avoided him altogether. I would pretend he was not there even if he was talking to me directly. I would catch him staring at me, but he backed down a lot after he realized that I wouldn't give in. One day, I came into work and he was gone. Desk was cleared off, totally empty. He apparently had sent another blonde woman a bunch of flowers and followed her out into the parking lot where she got off work. He had parked his car right next to hers and tried to force her into his car to go home with him, but she got away. He was fired and escorted off the property the next day by the police. I'm not sure why he had decided to come back or why he wasn't arrested sooner, but he was caught at work and removed. Nothing too eventful, but it is scary knowing that it could have been me that he forced into his car. A neighborhood kid I grew up with liked to play with matches and was fascinated with fires of any kind. It made me nervous because a sort of wild look came over his eyes when he'd stare into the fire he had created. I even told my parents, who mentioned it to his parents, who thought it was just a phase he was going through. Then a few years later, it was reported that he burned his parents' garage down and was being charged with arson and clinically treated for pyromania. When I used to work at a deli, we hired a 20-something kid that looked like the serial killer Ed Kemper, sans the mustache. At first, he would amuse us by telling us stories about how he'd fought off 8 guys with weapons, or how his girlfriend was a model who traveled all the time, and that's why we never saw her. Then things started getting bad, especially when someone angered him. I would catch him talking to himself, saying things like, "If I see that B word again, I'm going to stick this in both her eyes." Management got wind of this and canned his butt immediately. 10 months later, we find out he actually went to prison for attempting to assault someone with a knife. In college, my best friend met a lady in one of her AG classes. The lady was super weird. I remember her having this huge vendetta against the university because they wouldn't let her use handicapped parking spaces when she had no proof she needed them. This lady is the reason I Google the crap out of new people now, because I looked her up and found an article that she was a serial animal hoarder and mistreater. That was from the year before we met her, and she would be the feature of similar articles in the future. This was at the start of our second semester there. If you search her name, plus Cat Lady, there are a bunch of new stories starting in 2003. It looks like the last updates were in 2016. In conclusion, best friend makes new friend who turns out to be an animal hoarder with dead cats in her freezer. Not me, but my wife. She's a teacher and had an elementary student who creeped her out from day one. He was manipulative, always trying to get his work done by copying other students' papers, and generally just a little odd. Partway through the school year, his mum had a manic-depressive episode and sadly took her own life. 2 years later, the student blew part of his hand off, making a pipe bomb. A year after that, he was also left unsupervised with a kindergarten-aged student who ironically, my wife would also later have as a student, and horribly mistreated her. He's in juvie now, though he should be out before he's 17. I was so young that I don't remember, but my dad has told me this story. My uncle had a roommate when I was about 3 years old. He was apparently a pretty nice dude on the surface, friendly, and didn't at all appear creepy to my dad or uncle that he lived with. Once, my dad and uncle expressed wanting to go somewhere that wasn't appropriate for me, and the guy offered to babysit. I was a very sweet and quiet kid, but upon my dad saying he'd be back in a little bit and I was going to stay with this man for a few hours, I apparently threw an absolute crap storm, kicking, screaming, and refusing. And even at 3, this was absolutely not normal behavior. My dad was really confused, but changed his mind and did not leave me with him. And only weeks later, my uncle discovered the man in question had a history of prison time for possessing indecent material containing minors and attempted kidnapping. People that quit their job in a hilarious fashion, how did you do it? My wife worked for a certain chain coffee shop a few years ago. She got another job, so requested reduced hours. This didn't happen for 3 straight weeks. During that 3rd week, she had a soccer mum from hell trying to get her attention by throwing fricking snowballs at her through the drive-thru window. My wife then stopped what she was doing and tossed the soccer mum's iced tea at her, which exploded everywhere and slammed the window. 5 minutes later, she had written her letter of resignation with the only things she could find: a purple crayon and a sticky note. I used to work at a place that rhymes with Pizza Hut, and the managers there were real cheapskates. There was this nice old man that would come in every Sunday and order a triple extra cheese pizza, and while they charged him for 3 times the cheese, they would forbid us from ever actually putting that much cheese on a pizza because apparently cheese in the pizza selling world is akin to gold. So instead of 3 times extra cheese, he would really be getting what the instructions would qualify as barely enough for a regular cheese pizza. On the day my 2 weeks' notice ended, the old guy just happened to be my last order, so I went into the walk-in and grabbed an entire box of cheese and proceeded to dump the entire thing onto his pizza, and tossed it into the oven. It was stacked so high that it couldn't even fit into it and half of it was scraped off. Anyway, the look on the old guy's face when he saw me do this made it all worth it. Imagine pure excitement. Needless to say, I didn't put the correct phone number down for future job references. That poor guy probably ordered double cheese and then thought, well crap, this isn't enough either, and went with triple, only to be given the same amount anyway. Worked in pizza place for 5 years. Cheese is definitely the gold of that world. It's the most expensive thing on the pizza. Dough and sauce cost almost nothing. As a home pizza enthusiast, this is definitely true. Especially when you get deep into the hobby, you will spend a damn fortune on that edible gold. Worked as a teller at a bank for a few years. GM and supervisor were both kind of crappy in their own ways. My buddy there was also a teller who felt similarly and wanted to get out. We started applying in places and both got interviews at the same company. As luck would have it, we both got hired and phone calls about 10 minutes apart. There was only one other teller aside from us, and when it got busy, supervisor usually had to jump in as well, and usually hated it. It felt like we were constantly short-staffed, and days when one person would call out sick or be on vacation would suck. Being down 2 people was the worst. Naturally, when we both got hired, it became a race to see who could turn in their 2 weeks' notice first. He printed his off and raced into the GM's office, walking out with a big smile. GM calls me in and offers me full-time hours after I had been requesting them for months. I jumped in saying, "Let me stop you right there. I'm also turning in my 2 weeks' notice." Remembering that look of disbelief will make me smile every time. A solid professional FU is just as enjoyable to me as going out with a bang. Wrote a normal letter of resignation before I got in the shower one morning. No big deal, got into the office and was straight ignored by management. Oh well, told you when my last day was. Fast forward 3 days, they pull me into a conference room to ask what it would take to keep me. I say, nothing, but don't want to ruin them. Sole IT manager for a staff of 70, and would be willing to consult part-time. They liked that idea and said they'd be willing to pay me my current hourly as a consultant. I was prepared for this and told them that that wasn't what I said. I said I would consult and my consulting rate was $200 an hour. They were flabbergasted and insulted. I was making about $18 an hour as a salary. They thought it was insane even though they'd pay a consulting firm $600 an hour when I was on vacation. Needless to say, having planned to quit, it was no skin off my back and laughed about it. They didn't take kindly to me laughing about their anger and told me to pack my crap. I did so, got an extra 10 days vacation paid out of it. 1992. I was 19 and working at the most pissant radio studio imaginable, AM Country Gold. The notoriously cheap, abusive and dishonest owner, a fella named Wes, had just screwed me out of a promised bonus. It was the latest in a long line of dishonest acts and I'd had enough. The rest of the sales team was afraid to stand up to Wes and he screamed abuse at them constantly. except the lone woman, who he was constantly a creep to. They were all in their 30s and 40s, working the same garbage job I was, but desperately needed it. I didn't. So I engaged in a very public shouting match with Wes in the lobby, saying all the things everyone there had always wanted to say. Then I swept the contents of the front desk onto the floor and stormed out. Instead of leaving, I went around the side of the building to a payphone and called the radio station request line. In a fake southern accent, I said, "Hey y'all, I just told my cheap, no-good, lying piece of human garbage boss to go to hell. Play me out with, 'Take this job and shove it,' and dedicate it to my former boss, Wes." The disc jockey had no idea what had just happened in the lobby, or that my Wes was the Wes, so he enthusiastically played my recorded dedication and added, "This one is for you, Wes. Choke on it, you sack of crap." The building had speakers inside and out, constantly playing the radio feed, so I got to hear Wes get clowned by his own radio studio before driving off into the sunset. Someone at my previous workplace, a huge grocery store in a large mall, went to the PA system we use to issue messages to the whole mall and said something along the lines of, "Dear customers, managers and co-workers, I fricking quit," and then proceeded to leave. Someone did this at the Walmart I worked at. Customer busybodies complained because of the curse word. The manager just asked, "What do you want me to do? He already quit." "I'm sorry, ma'am, but there's really nothing I can do. As you already heard yourself, he frickin' quit." I wrote a respectful letter thanking them for the opportunity and all they've taught me. The first letter of every sentence spelled out FUCK, boss's name. Nobody noticed. I knew someone who worked in a really crappy call center. His boss never had time for anyone. When he went to tell his boss that he was leaving, the boss waved him out of the room as he was on call. So he wrote, "I quit" on a post-it note, stuck it on the boss's screen, and just walked out. I did this when I worked at Kaufman's. I went up to HR to give my 2 weeks notice, GTFO, but before I could even get a word out, the HR lady flapped her hand at me and told me to come back in an hour because she was going on lunch. So I wrote, "I quit" on a piece of paper, signed and dated it, and left it on her desk. She called me later to let me know that since I didn't give 2 weeks notice, I would never be eligible to work for Kaufman's or Macy's ever again. I told her I'd just have to live with that. I do love it when people threaten to cut off a tie that I have clearly just severed myself. Bad jobs, bad exes, crappy ex-friends. I don't care if you never want to talk to me again. That was actually the point. I used to work for my father. It was probably the worst time of my life. He treated me like absolute crap, paid me very poorly, and made me work 70+ hours a week. I was young, just out of high school, and I complained about my predicament a lot. His response was always, "If you don't like it, there's the door." 6 months before I quit, he made me run his night shift, which meant 6 p.m. through 6:30 a.m. Monday through Saturday. I was very unhappy about this, so I applied for another job. I got it and went to my father's office with a list of demands. He responded with his usual reply, so I said, "Alright, I've gotten a job offer somewhere else. Frick you, I quit." The look on his face was priceless. He truly believed that because I had an amazing job security, that I'd be willing to put up with anything and that I'd stay there for my entire career. In one short, sweet instant, I proved to him that this was not the case, and he lost his most valuable employee. The icing on the cake was the fact that the job that I left him for is at the company that manufactures the very machinery and software he relies on in business. So anytime something goes wrong in his factory, he has to call me to fix it for him. So, how are family events these days? Honestly, they're much better than they used to be. I hated working for him so much and wasted some of my best years slaving away for him without so much as a thank you. I never actually talked to him when I worked for him. I'd have formal discussions when I had to for work, but outside of work I literally never saw him. Now I don't really have any issues with him at all. First job when I was 15 for a discount clothing brand store. Head manager was the aunt for our store manager, who was 19. Our store manager did nothing most of the time and used to chat to her boyfriend and friends quite loudly on the store phone, much to the annoyance of everybody. One night, it's come closing, we're grabbing our coats and getting ready to leave after a really busy day, and the store manager storms in, telling us how she's lowered the shutters and won't let us leave until we've helped her finish the one job she had all day to do, cause her aunt is doing a surprise inspection in the morning. Everyone is teed off, especially the people who've had to watch her do literally nothing all day. She turns spiteful, threatening to delay our pays, dock our wages, etc. All bullcrap. For one woman, it was the last straw. She had a kid to pick up from a club, so she waited till she left us alone to work, walked up to the shutters, pulled them up manually by hand, and all of us crawled out to freedom. We left her a note saying, "Good luck explaining to your aunt why 4 people just quit." During my exit interview, I told HR the real reason I was leaving was due to the quality of the office chairs. I said they were an eyesore, uncomfortable, and made me ashamed to come to work and resulted in subpar job satisfaction. 2 weeks later, I was told by previous co-workers everyone got brand new, top-of-the-line office chairs. I worked for my aunt for nearly 5 years. It was a product delivery and retail store. When I came to work there, I was originally supposed to be running computers and taking orders to cover for them in the week they all took vacations. As time went on, I started running the retail part on Saturdays, and my willingness to do so was the only reason they opened on the fricking weekend. I took over the office running by myself on Sundays as well, and at a point worked 7 days straight for a month or more until someone realized I might need a break. My cousin was in charge of the front retail, and she resented me for working in the back with her mother. She snapped one day and started being rude and abrasive to customers, so we got switched front to back. I worked every single job in that place, save for driving the box trucks. I'd had enough when they hired a new guy who I found out was making exactly the same an hour as me, $8.25. Never work for family. That sucks, I'm sorry, and you're right. Never work for family, never rent from family, never loan money to family. Business is business, personal is personal. Keep them separate. I worked for a law firm doing research and analysis. I wrote a custom program on my own time that would automate editing down these huge lists we'd get from an outside vendor, boiling it down to only what we wanted. First, only my team used the code. By the time I left, over 150 people were using it. It sounds minimal, but it was actually a huge time saver. The program would boil down a list, 100 pages long, to about 10 pages, a process we used to do manually a couple of times a day. A layoff was announced, and I was part of the outplacement, but the firm wanted to continue using my program. I asked if there would be compensation as it was coded on my own time, never paid for it, etc. I was told no, and besides, there's nothing really keeping us from using it when you're gone. For the remainder of my time, 2 years, I would create patches whenever the format of the data changed. With my last patch, I put in code that would disable the program and erase key parts of the program 1 month after my last day. From what I understand from people still with the firm, on day X, everyone came in, booted their machines, and the program was simply gone. Efficiency fell through the floor, delaying opening cases, billing clients, etc. I wanted 10K, they lost more than that in the first week without the program. Some have stated I might have been in a position to sue for compensation instead. This was a huge law firm, billed in the hundreds of millions a year, and had thousands of very talented attorneys. I could have sued, sure, but they could have made it very expensive for me, dragged it out so long it would have cost me way too much. This is my third quitting stories batch of posts with this channel, and I'm not sure I'll ever get tired of this particular subject. There is some real vicarious joy to be had with people sticking it to their bosses. I was working for Argos as a Christmas job while studying. After a while, it was becoming too much as I had to stay in work until deliveries were unpacked. This meant some days I was leaving from my college at 8:30 a.m. and not getting home until 1 a.m. that night. One night was a particularly large delivery and it was getting very late with no end in sight. I decided I'd had enough and told the supervisor I was finished, didn't want to do the job anymore and wanted to go home. He rejected this and said I was going nowhere until the delivery was unpacked. I stood in front of him and repeated that I quit, therefore I don't care about the delivery. Completing my studies was more important to me than earning an extra bit of cash. He still said I was going nowhere and refused to unlock the door to let me out. Despite feeling I had case for false imprisonment, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I ran out the fire escape door and down the street never to return. I'll always remember the sound of the fire escape door making a big dong as it hit the metal railings, and I made my escape to freedom. Worked in a video store, back when there was such a thing. My coworker showed up having taken clearly a lot of green herb. He was also about 6'3" and 140 pounds, so he stood out in a crowd to begin with. Anyway, he came in for a 4-hour shift, stood in the middle of our bank of checkout registers and just ate chips. Like 6 bags of chips back to back, and he ate them slow, and he savored the crap out of each bite. The whole time he had zero facial expression. Think of the dull stare of a chewing dairy cow. After about 3 hours, he calmly turns to me and says, "I can't do this anymore," and gently sets down his bag of chips and walks out the door. We never saw him in the store again. At 16, I worked at a Dairy Queen brazier in Texas. My manager was a jerk. One night, I sliced a good chunk of my thumb off because they did not have the proper safety equipment. After being out of work for 3 weeks, I returned to work. My thumb was still pretty screwed up, but I was trying. My manager kept riding me, telling me I had to move faster. I was the only short-order cook when I saw 3 Greyhound buses pull up, and I knew I was in trouble. She came back into the kitchen and said if I didn't move fast for these buses, she'd find someone who would. That was the last straw. I knew no one in the entire restaurant could cook, so I took her up on her threat and simply walked out the back door. She flipped me off as I drove away. My friends told me that they hardly got any orders out and the buses left since they couldn't get the food out. I felt bad for the people on the buses, but I was sick of being berated by management. Worked in the cinema as a teenager, came in late for work after they changed my schedule during my days off and didn't think to mention it to me. Boss lost it and started shouting at me. As far as I'm concerned, if you need to shout, I'm not even listening. So I let her rant away for a good 15 minutes while I was at my locker clearing it out. When it finally clicked that I wasn't listening or getting ready to work, she stopped and asked what I was doing. I said, "Going to see Lord of the Rings with the lads who've just finished, as I'm doing nothing else with my evening. Might go for a pint after. What's your plans?" I like this one. It's simple and clear, and you didn't curse or scream at her. When my boss was having a meltdown, one of my coworkers kept saying, "Didn't catch that. Could you speak up?" She literally lost her voice, screaming at him. I worked for a Midas garage. One week we got a new service manager, and up until that point we always inspected, estimated, and sold our own jobs. This new guy wanted to inspect the cars and then checked the estimates. Early on Saturday morning, a girl in her 20s with a baby came into the shop and said her brakes were making noise. I took the ticket, test drove the car, and then pulled it into the shop and then inspected the car. I found the LR brake shoe had gone metal to metal. I mic'd the drum, and it was okay. Wheel cylinders and springs, hardware, all okay. I estimated the ticket. It came out to about $150 to fix the car. I went to the new service manager and handed him the estimate. He went and looked at the car. He didn't even take 30 seconds, and he said he needed to add new wheel cylinders, hardware kit, and 2 drums to the estimate. I told him all the parts he wanted to replace were okay. He said, "Do it." I just shrugged my shoulders and walked away. He went back to the service desk. I walked into a completely crowded waiting area, stood in the middle of the room, and proceeded to tell everyone in the room what the new service manager wanted me to do. I turned around and went to go get my truck to load my toolbox and leave. The service manager tried to stop me from loading my box on my truck. At the time, about 5 customers came out and helped me lift the box into the truck, and then started screaming at the service manager. They all wanted their cars back together and taken off the lifts. It got so bad one customer called the cops, and the service manager called the owner. The cops and the owner showed up. I was putting the girl's wheel back on. The owner came over to talk to me, and I told him what had happened and what I did. The owner went over to the service manager, who was surrounded by all the teed-off customers, and fired him. I decided at that point I was still going to quit because the owner was just acting. He told the service manager to do it, obviously. At that point, a few other techies were packing their crap up too. As I was walking up to my truck to leave, the girl walked up to me and thanked me. She asked if I knew another shop that could fix her car, and I decided I would fix it myself. So we went over to the parts store, got the parts, went to my house, and redid the brakes. Not to make this whole story even longer, this was in 1989 and we've been married for 24 years now. The service manager couldn't get a job at any shop around. I still see him every once in a while, gathering up the grocery carts at H-E-B. I managed to find a telemarketing job as one of my first jobs. It sucked and we were treated like animals, but it was close enough that I could walk there from home. I only intended to stay long enough to afford a car. One day, I realized that I had reached my set amount of dollars for a car purchase. As a joke, I strayed as far from the sales pitch as possible. I changed my greetings to things like, "Hey," or "Sup." I impersonated celebrity voices. People stopped working around me. They just listened in shock. But it also completely backfired. It was my highest day of sales ever. I sold 10 times my average. The pit boss was bewildered, which is why I wasn't fired right away. He listened in on my calls that day. He begged me to stay, but I was out. I used to work for a telecommunications company. My mum was very sick over the last 3 months of her life, so I had to go home most weekends to see her. It's a 6-hour journey to get from where I worked to the town where I'm from. When her birthday came around, I requested a couple of days off that I'd saved for this specific occasion. Yet the days off were denied because we were approaching a busy time of the year for sales. At this point, I hadn't mentioned what was happening at home because, well, I was always taught you keep your work and personal lives separate. But I said to my boss, who at the time I saw as a pretty compassionate person. She never took any issue when I got sick or was late for whatever reason. But when I told her, she just looked at me point blank and said, "I don't want to hear this." After that meeting, I went back to my desk and sat there for about 20 minutes thinking of a solution. The solution was to get my things and just leave. I said goodbye to my friends and on my way out, flipped my boss off and just walked out. I went straight to my car and drove back to my hometown that night. It was the best decision I ever made. I got to spend all my time with my mum before she went. We even got to go on vacation and spend one last week away together because I had time to do so. I'll never, ever regret walking out that day. Not exactly hilarious, but I had a good chuckle to myself on that drive home. The look on my boss's face will never leave me. It was sweet. I worked as a mechanic at Pep Boys several years ago. While I worked there, some of us discovered that if the drainage pipe in the shop were pressurized, the toilet would shoot water out of the bowl. The service manager at my store was a piece of crap. The day that I quit, I waited until he went into the bathroom to take a dump. I filled up a cheater, a device used to seat a tire onto a wheel, and released about 200 psi all at once into the drainage pipe. The toilet fricking exploded, the manager screamed, and then comes storming out of the bathroom covered in his own crap. It's the middle of the lunch rush at the restaurant. It's a gorgeous day, but the porch is closed, so myself and this poor middle-aged waitress are taking everyone who's expected to sit outside into our room. We're providing crap service because there's usually 5 servers for this many people, not 2. I asked the manager if she wouldn't mind calling people in to open up the porch, which is where all of these people are expected to sit. She goes off on me. "Are you fricking kidding me?" I exclaim. "You just swore at a manager. You're fired." I was going back to college in 2 weeks, so I didn't really give a frick. The thing is, she had to cash me out first, so for those 10 minutes I quietly cussed her out in front of everyone until she started screaming her head off in the middle of the restaurant. She was fired a couple of weeks later. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, linked at the top of the description. And if you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot, linked in the description too. Either way, thanks a lot for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.